we are indoctrinated, are we not, to seek this, ethereal kind of accreditation and reward and acknowledgement? And is it not just enough to be?
We have to be prepared to change. We have to be prepared to lead in a new era. And I think that is something we have to do, and we have to collectively hold our nerve with that as well. And, and as Ty has said, we need to collaborate. We need to talk to each other. We need to spend time having these big questions and having open debates. There's no right or wrong answers. And I think we have to really move into that sphere of building those collaborative networks as school leaders so we can have these open conversations.
Welcome to Rethinking Education. Education's critical friend.
Hi, Golding and Kat Place. Welcome to the Rethinking Education podcast.
Boridar, James.
James, Boridar.
Boridar, is that?
Boridar.
Good morning.
Good morning. Okay.
All the way from sunny Wales.
So welcome. It's lovely to see you both and to have you both on the podcast. It's been a while in the planning, this one, hasn't it? We've been talking about it for quite a while. And do you want to just repeat what you said off air, as it were, a moment ago, Kat, about the reason that you sort of initially suggested coming on the podcast?
Yeah, no problem. So Ty and I are big fans, listen to your podcast a lot, and particularly those nice lengthy ones when doing long runs and things like that. And quite often find myself whilst running sort of shouting at you via your podcast that there is a different way. And some of the arguments maybe being posed in the podcast around the restraints in education, we are doing things slightly different in Wales. And I would often find myself saying, no, we do it differently. It's not like that everywhere. And sort of the view that you were putting out on many podcasts was a very Anglo-centric view. And I just say there's life over the border in Wales. And with our mass curriculum reform, we are doing things in a slightly different way.
And so absolutely. And I'm very aware that the podcast and my own thinking is very sort of Anglo-centric. I am English. I live in England, that's just sort of the world that I'm in, but I'm very aware of it, and I'm keen to burst out of my bubble. And so thank you for popping that bubble and for making me to expand my horizons. Really looking forward to this conversation. You're right. I don't think that very many people this side of the border, the people sort of know that something is happening in Wales, but nobody really is that clued up about it in the conversations that I've had. And so let's just do a couple of quick introductions from each of you, just to sort of say about where you work currently. We might do the autobiographical bit later on, but let's just do a quick introduction, and then we'll do this whole like what's happening in Wales 101 essentially, and you can bring in this story of what's happening in your own schools and also the wider picture. Then we'll do the autobiographical stuff, and then we'll do the rethinking education bit, and we'll put the world to rights. Does that sound all right?
Perfect.
Good stuff. So let's start with you, Ty. Would you like to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Certainly. My name's Ty Golding. I'm currently a head teacher of a primary school, two-form entry in the town of Barry in South Wales, which some people might have heard of through some TV comedy programmes in recent times. We've got quite a mixed demographic. We are running at 35% free school meals, and we're a diverse community, and we're in a very old environment. In fact, our building was put up in 1892, and we are suffering the consequences of such on a daily basis. However, great community, and I've only been there full time since September, so it's early days.
Right. Okay. So it's not a new school, is it? It's the school with. How long has the school been around for?
It's 131 years old.
Right.
It's anything but new. And the reason I became involved is that the school found itself with a little bit of tension nearly 2 years ago, and I came in and was working there 1 or 2 days a week to support and help out. And it put me in a position where I was executive head across that school and another school which was brand new and actually built in 2015. And so, there was a real sort of dichotomy of situations, if you like. between the way that the sort of environment operated. And it was last summer that I took the leap and sort of moved, if you like, from that executive role between the two, and thought that the school that I'm in now needed a lot more of me and a lot more commitment and a lot of time, and deserved it as well. So, and it's exciting. So I've been there since September and enjoying it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And over to you, Kat.
So I'm Kat Place, and I'm head teacher of a primary school in Newport in South Wales, and a little bit of a different story to Ty, really. I've been at my 20th year in education, 16 of which as a senior leader, deputy or a head, and then I had this amazing opportunity back in 2017 to open a brand new school on a brand new housing estate in Newport. So every single thing about the school is new. We opened on a growing school basis. So I opened in September 2017 with just over 100 children and 16 staff. And then as the community grew, literally as in they were building houses, the school grew. And then sort of within 3 years, we were at capacity, and we've now got 375 children and just over 50 staff. So a massive journey over the last 5 years in terms of growing not only a school, but also being a focal point for the growing of a new community, which has just been fascinating, and being able to shape something completely from scratch. So I was the first person appointed. There was no legacy. There's no leaky building. There's no issues. You know, it literally is, this is a blank canvas. Off you go, build a school, paint what you want. So amazing.
Yeah, I bet that must have felt like a bit of a dream ticket when you first landed that job. Like those opportunities don't come around often, do they?
Absolutely. And I think, you know, for me, I was a long time a deputy, and I had maybe a little bit of criticism about why you were deputy head for so long. And I'm so glad I waited, and I waited for that right school to come along, because I always knew it would. And then the moment I saw that advert, that school was mine, and I knew it would be mine. And I'm very glad.
We pick up on that, Kat, as well, don't we? You know, about that situation and how, you know, how unique and nuanced the situations are across schools, across, you know, not just Wales, about the UK, but the world as well. And, you know, even having had the fortunate situation of opening a brand new school myself, it was the product of two former schools. And so two very embedded cultures and established staff as well. So, you know, I think that does occupy quite a bit of our conversation as well. But I think you're right, you know, absolutely, you know, Willy Wonka golden ticket time, that is, isn't it? That's the dream. And she's done very well with it.
Thanks.
Yes, I saw her. So should we just briefly mention? So your school was inspected recently by Estyn, the Welsh Ofsted, if that's not an inaccurate way to describe it. The Welsh Inspectorate. Ty, for the benefit of listeners, Ty is slack-jawed with outrage at that epithet. So anyway, you were inspected by Estyn. We'll talk a bit about how Estyn is different to Ofsted later on, because that's actually a really interesting and important part of the conversation. So talk us through the inspection.
Yeah, so, well, originally we were supposed to have been inspected in March 2020. And the day of our inspection, we had the dreaded phone call to say it was cancelled due to COVID. And then we went into national lockdown a few days later. So naturally, we were all absolutely devastated, because we were ready for it, and we really wanted to have that validation of our journey. So we had to wait a couple of years longer. And in October of last year, Estyn arrived, and a very, very thorough and, dare I say, brutal process. And really sort of forensically looking at our journey, but also at what the learning offer is. What do we do for our children, and how do we ensure children are making progress in learning? And I'm very, very, very proud to say that we had no recommendations, and I actually couldn't quite believe it, and it's still a pinch me moment. And I think for us as a school, you know, we don't do what we do because of Estyn. We don't do what we do because of any external verification, or because we're told to do it from a national picture. But what the inspection did for us was that gave us that validation that we are doing the right thing, and, you know, we have been brave. We have thought outside of the norm in terms of education and how we've built our school and particularly our curriculum. And I think for us it was that validation that yes, we are different, but we're still on the right track, which was amazing.
I think you've hit a really good point there as well, haven't you, Kat? Is how amazing and wonderful that is. You need to be very careful as a school leader that should not be a driver. It's almost as if for you, and we've chatted about this, that is an unintended implication and a really good one. But when it becomes the intended outcome, I think that's where we start to see fault lines appearing, not just within schools, but actually within the wider system. And it's where you land in that sort of tail wagging dog scenario then. And the amount of, times I've had conversations and seen head teachers on the inverse situation as you, Kat, saying, we need to do this because I want to get a good ESTIN outcome. And I think that's the worry for me now, is that we need to be careful that both celebrating what you've done and you've achieved, but also be careful that the message is not misconstrued in a way that should be people's ambition, because actually it shouldn't.
Absolutely. And I think as well that sharing that has been crucial, and saying to people, stand true to what you believe and your why for your community, and be brave about that. Don't get sidetracked into doing what the school down the road is doing if it doesn't fit your community and your school. And we've had to make those decisions, as we've grown and as we've developed as a school. And I'm really glad that we have. But like I said, we don't do it for anybody apart from the children in our school.
And how many times as well, just made me remember, how many times have you and I sat in a workshop or a conference or a meeting, and something has come up on the screen that's been from either of our schools or our work, and rebadged and simply just tried to sort of be retrofitted into somebody else's system without that.
Many to mention.
Well, there's too many to mention, but you and I keep, have that conversation. It without the why, and it's bizarre. And we need to be that's where I'm sort of nervous about, is that people look at success in another school, in another context, and it's about replication.
Yeah.
It's not about that sort of, that journey that you need to go through that's right for your school and your children.
Absolutely. Well, congratulations anyway on that. It's very impressive, and it's a wonderful thing to hear about. And while we're doing these introductions, can I just quickly ask about how the two of you know one another? So I know that you work quite closely together, and so just for the benefit of listeners, we're running this pilot in Wales at the moment of the implementation program that I've been working on for the last few years. And Kat and Ty schools are both involved in that. And I know that your schools are working together. You did a tweet last week that they were working together sort of in parallel on a similar project. And I know that you've worked together in the past as well. And geographically, it's nearby. I came to Newport not long ago for a friend's birthday, and we visited Barry because it was just nearby. And so that, I can see the closeness. But how did you come to know one another and work together in this way?
You'll have to correct me here, Kat, but I think it was Cardiff Museum. And I think we were in the basement. Now, it's not as exciting as it sounds, Jake, unfortunately. But we were both appointed to what is, and sort of has the name of the National Digital Learning Council. So I'd previously been involved in a policy development group with Welsh Government, which has sort of came up with a product which we now refer to in Wales as HUB. HWB, not hub, which actually in our language refers to a leg up or a help. And it's a national online platform, all encompassing and almost that kind of cradle to grave sort of education sort of principle behind it. And there was a national group put in there to report to and share back and support the minister really with the direction of national digital learning. So that was my route into it. And, avoiding trying to speak on your behalf, Kat, I think you'd had a lot of digital and professional learning experience, didn't you? And driving, training and workshops and learning for schools.
Yeah, definitely. And I think when the NDLC, as we call it, they went back out then to advert and to have sort of a new group forming following the initial work that was done to create HUB. And I just thought, what an opportunity. Let's go for something. I'd never worked on a national level. I was a deputy head at the time and very interested in digital leadership. And then, as Ty said, we met in a basement in a Cardiff museum. And I think what we realised quite quickly through the NDLC meetings is there was a synergy in our thinking to a certain extent. I know he's got for the listeners, Ty is wagging his finger. And I said to a certain extent because there were a lot of things that we also challenge each other on. And then I think our sort of relationship, our friendship grew in terms of with alongside Curriculum for Wales and how that developed. And we were in a really interesting position in as much as Ty started to work for Welsh Government to lead curriculum design. And in the same year that I opened a brand new school. And as we describe it, it was almost the perfect storm. So things that were happening at that national policy level, I could, think about. I was also part of national groups within that Curriculum for Wales development, and is able then to try out things in my school and almost report back and say, this worked, this didn't work, and try that out as well. And we're also doing doctorate at the same time as well. So we're very busy. And I think we complement each other is in the differences, in the fact that our schools are very different demographically. The position within our schools is very different, and we do a lot of professional learning for other schools, and we're able to showcase very different views, but a very common understanding of curriculum and a common thought process where learning is concerned.
I just thinking about that actually is, I think perhaps it'd be nice to think that there's a lesson in the fact that how well we can work together and how well we want the same outcome, but actually how our methods and our belief system, if you like, that paradigm around that isn't a match, is it? It's not perfect at all in any way. And yeah, I think it is possibly a coincidence. I don't know that we do seem to keep landing in the same, or we did seem to be landing in the same room as each other. I don't know whether I can use the terms. It's almost kind of a maturing of our kind of experience and moving between working at a local or regional level to then, having conversations and being involved at the national level. But the perfect storm, as Kat describes it, for me was almost like the perfect lab, actually. And she won't like me to describe her as lab rat, but
Absolutely not.
whether she likes it or not, she was the lab rat. And it was for me about having somebody with real reflective ability, real sort of collegiate approach, and that ability to use an intelligent and a sophisticated way to think about what curriculum could be, that I could sort of have as a sounding board. And often, I think we can probably share this at the moment. Often it was things that weren't public and, weren't wider knowledge. But in that position, I really needed somebody who would push back, or somebody who would be prepared to try it. And I have to say a huge thank you. And I think a lot of the curriculum is thanks to Kat's willingness to take risks and go down cul-de-sacs and, long and winding roads alike in the name of the greater good, not just in the selfish good for her own school. So, I think, and I don't think that many people are aware of that. So, testament to her and her ability to take risks, really.
That's amazing. Thank you for that. I'm really glad that I asked that question. So let's get into what's been happening. You sort of touched upon it a little bit, but some of these things that have been happening at a national level, and then we'll maybe sort of come back and talk about how this is playing out in your individual schools. But so this started, was it the Donaldson report that started this, which was around 2015, 16? Was it a few years ago?
February 2015.
Right.
Graham Donaldson published a recommendation report that he was commissioned to do on the state of Welsh education, if you like, and curriculum, and it was, and is called Successful Futures. So that's where all this sort of developed and grew from. However, there's a caveat in that there had been mild sort of tentative footsteps into reform, with renegotiating how we looked at literacy and numeracy and the early signs of what a digital competence framework looked like already. So I think nationally we'd already start to take steps away from, the literacy hour and all of those other sort of cumbersome, if you like, products that were getting imparted across the border to us. And I think that sort of raised a number of questions across the system, which is why Graham was brought in.
And is it the case, because there's been reports that have been done, like famously the Tomlinson report in this country, which was not implemented under Labour, and there was lots of support for that. Well, Labour didn't want to go there. But is it essentially the case that the Welsh Government commissioned this report and then just liked the look of it so much that they essentially decided to just implement essentially all of Donaldson's recommendations? Is that
absolutely 68 recommendations, and I think both a clever move and a shrewd move as well, in the fact that you've got someone there who has engaged with the inspectorate, with the teaching, with the leadership profession, come up with these recommendations, and the government at the time, the minister at the time, accepted every single one of them unequivocally. But equally so, and the shrewd move in that was the invite for Graham to come and actually take a lead in realising all 68 of those recommendations. Kat, what are your recollections of?
Yeah, I mean, at the time, when that sort of happened as well, I think one of the other major changes that happened in education was, alongside Successful Futures being published, was also then the Welsh Government really considering how they were going to implement that change, what would be the process for that change. And they set about having what they called pioneers. And they were taken from a selection of schools across Wales, individuals, to actually co-construct the curriculum. And again, I think a very brave move. If this wasn't about policy directors, sitting in Cardiff, in Cathays Park, making the decisions, it was actually about those closest to the profession making the decisions about what the curriculum was going to look like. I think there's a misconception across schools in those early days where it was almost seen as an us and them. The pioneers had it all. The pioneers were given the answers as to what to do. But actually, that wasn't strictly true, because what the pioneers did was actually get into a very focused professional learning for themselves as to what is curriculum, what are these aspects of curriculum, and how do you build curriculum to ensure that breadth and depth across a 3 to 16 continuum of learning.
What I found when I first started as well is that, whilst that was the sort of early misconception, by the time I was involved at 2017, I think the reality was that we were heading, unfortunately, towards a have and a have not system. And we were, if you like, sort of hothousing these kind of, pioneers, and they were exposed to some real high level thinking and engagement. And, the most important commodity to any professional, they were given time away from the classroom to sit and engage and challenge, each other and be challenged. And so when I come in, there was kind of a disparate system between that, between the professional learning offer nationally and the understanding of how we were going to support this curriculum, and the understanding, as Kat has just pointed out, what about the rest of the population? 33,000 registered teachers, 27,000 registered or in schools practicing, and then we had several hundred working on the curriculum. There's got some very serious consequences or potential consequences that needed to be thought about and managed.
I think one of the ways that was managed has been the timing as well in terms of Welsh Government. So for listeners to know that actually the statutory rollout of the curriculum has only just happened now this academic year. So from September 2022 for primary schools and optional for year 7, this is the first year of it becoming a statutory requirement for schools to follow. But leading up to 2022 has been us trialling, us having a go, providing opportunities to make mistakes before it becomes that statutory framework. So again, I think that has been something that has really helped us.
Yeah, it's like smart implementation, right? To have a little sandpit first of all, and to have some sharing of good practice and so on. So obviously we're not going to get into all 68 of the recommendations. But can you give us some broad strokes? What are the key sort of ideas? How is this different to what has gone before? How is this different to what's happening elsewhere in the world?
I'll let Ty go first. He's the expert on this.
I think, first and foremost, and it might not sound at a superficial level very different, but the curriculum is purpose driven and purposes driven. And I would probably find it hard to look at any curriculum document globally and not have the front page or, that sort of precursory reflection on purpose behind curriculum and education. But what this set of recommendations did is it put 4 particular purposes at the heart of all learning. And these 4 purposes, if you like, were an ambition for all 16-year-olds and beyond in Wales. Alongside that, it was about ensuring that we moved away from a key stage mentality and making sure that we weren't looking at cliff edges in the education system, whether that be into education at the age of 3 to 5, whether that between, what you call and refer to as your foundation stage or in key stage 2, and that, the notorious cliff edge between year 6 and year 7 and key stage 2 and key stage 3. And then up towards the qualifications landscape too. So one of, and part of the driver really was very much then around ensuring that there was a continuity of learning. So the curriculum now is a 3 to 16 continuum. It was about bringing assessment in-house. And what I mean by that is that not looking at assessment as a bolt-on feature, not looking at it as an external measuring tool, and making sure that, your planning, your learning, your teaching, your pedagogy, if you like, that the underpinning of your practice was actually built on as much as it was on assessment, as it was on planning and the curriculum content as well and the ideals. It was about and really poking the finger and prodding the finger at accountability and trying to move away. And as I talked about earlier, really that tail wagging dog mentality. We were, and we have been for a number of years in Wales, as I know you are in England, we are hugely data rich, whether that's quantitative, qualitative. We had and used to receive packs termly, yearly in Wales, which, were sometimes in excess of 40, 50 pages long, with every possible combination of data of girls, boys, vulnerable groups, literacy, numeracy, science, Welsh, PSE, you name it, this pack sliced it, and you name it, we were judged on it. And schools were held to account. And what happened is, and I think it was really hard to get away from in the end, is that the system was gamed so much that we'd reached our ceiling. And there was literally nowhere else to game the system because we were all within 1 or 2% in Wales of being perfect schools. Imagine that. So, on a graph, that is. And then you tie that alongside, your international TIMS and your PISA performances. And there's a slight anomaly, to say the least. We weren't performing on those international measures. And so the system needed a reboot. And I think that's part of what those recommendations were. And it was about as well moving education from the hands of policymakers and politicians. And, we probably need to explore that ambition a little bit further and putting it in the hands of professionals, subsidiarity and the thinking that, those closest to the problems are definitely best equipped to be able to come up with the solutions, And finally, I think for me, and Kat will pick up, for me, it was about moving learning away from purely being silos and learning domains or disciplines or subject-based learning, and giving us in Wales, not necessarily a mandate to do it, but giving us the license to consider how we can better move away from learning in very discrete channels and having a look at the interplay, the interrelationships, the interdependencies, the reliances of learning across a curriculum in order to develop a holistic child. So if you partner that academic ambition with that interdependency and interrelationship with the purpose ambition, what you come up with for us really is, a future citizen of Wales and a future active, proactive, informed citizen of the world.
Where do I sign up?
You simply just need to apply for a Welsh passport, James, and you'll be fine.
I'm actually quite tempted to do that. I've been reading a lot about Druidry recently. I'm really interested in Welsh history. It's there's just I'm sign me up. I love Wales. And so would you add anything to that? That was a very comprehensive answer, Ty. Thank you. Is there anything that you would add to that, Kat?
I don't think so. Well, apart from, as Ty said right at the beginning, that it is that purpose-driven curriculum. And I think for us as school leaders, it's about making sure that we keep that in our heads, that it is purpose-driven, and looking at that structure. We're given a national structure to look at to help us shape our curriculum. But very much as school leaders, it's our role now to curriculum design. And I think that brings both its pluses and massive challenges, because in the end day, we were all teachers, who have been trained in literacy and numeracy hours and in subject disciplines. So to actually learn about curriculum design and actually bring that national level framework into school level design and planning has been a real challenge, but also a very exciting one.
And that's where, isn't it, Kat, I suppose, going back to your earlier point, where we get the internal and external criticism that we've gone soft, because people think that ability to create and develop a more contextualized curriculum to meet the needs of your learners, while still within the tolerances of a national framework, that's too loosey-goosey, if they went for a better phrase. And we get the word here, James, autonomy, bandied around, like it's going out of fashion. And Kat and I do a very pointed talk and discussion about perhaps we need to really reframe that dialogue and that rhetoric as agency. And any form of reading around a lot of sort of Mark Priestley's work and the work of Gerd Biester, and you really do get to underpin what agency and professional informed agency looks like, and not, it's not something that you can own.
So can we pick up, like, I want to just explore this idea that you just talked about the difference between autonomy and agency, and also I really want to get my head around the other word that you use, subsidiarity, which is attached to these ideas. So autonomy, in my layperson's understanding, means like self-rule, doesn't it? Like autonomous, like self-directing, like autonomous vehicles, like self-driving cars. So and then being agentic is something that's slightly different. Can you explain what you mean about the difference between those two? I don't know who wants to pick that up.
Kat, would you like to start? Or
Yeah, definitely. And I think exactly as you said, James, in terms of autonomous, I think it is very much about being that self-directed. And I think that's a bit of a myth when it comes to curriculum for Wales, and a bit of a misconception that is out there within Wales itself as well, that the new curriculum is just, there's no structure, or it just lets you do what you like. It really doesn't. And it's not about self-directed learning. Quite often curriculum for Wales is thought to have been a child-led curriculum. And again, that is a massive misconception, because there is a structure. There is something that we have to look at to help guide our thinking. But then this is where massively that agency comes in. And I think Priestley has had a lot of work, Mark Priestley has had a lot of work with Welsh Government, particularly around professional learning. And he describes agency as, it's not that something people can have as a capacity or a competence, but it's something that people do. And I think for us, agency is absolutely the right word, and we've had to build particularly a lot of that trust and agency within our own schools, within the profession as a whole, to be able to take that high level thinking and enact it in our school, to enable our children to have those structures for learning.
And I think one of your previous guests, actually, and it sort of evades me who it was, talked about this, actually, James, in the fact that the agency, isn't it, is that energy, that dynamic, and that output and that action that happens between a relationship. So it's what happens between people. It's not something that is owned by one. And you're right, isn't it? That autonomous is that sort of etymology, that Greek etymology of its own laws. And I think perhaps used in its extreme argument, it has become a straw man argument for us in Wales from certain sectors. And I think perhaps that's why I prefer the rhetoric around agency and making sure that the options, as Kat said, and the informed decisions are happening, the professional choices are happening, but with regards not just for the sake of, it has to have a purpose, it has to have an outcome, and it has to have an end goal as well. So I think agency for us stands a little bit stronger in the argument front and the debate front, albeit there is a degree of autonomy. However, I think the misconception also that comes with curriculum here in Wales at the moment is the fact that autonomy sits with the practitioner. And I'd say that's where the agency sits. Perhaps the autonomy sits more with the organisations. And the way that Kat and I approach that is that we take curriculum as a school, as an organisation. We look at how we develop as a learning organisation, how we develop leadership and professional learning, but actually how we take ownership of those spaces that we can fill within our national framework as a whole organisation, both horizontally in our organisations and as peers and colleagues, but also vertically, progressively through our organisations, and particularly in Kat's and my case, between those 3 and 11-year-olds and how they move forward, but equally so, and dare I say it, not really losing hope or handing over at 11. It's making sure that progressive, that vertical perspective actually continues. And that's no easy feat. The sectors are different. We have very different roles.
And I think as well, the other thing when it comes to agency, just building on what Ty was saying, there's also that thought then about the power in the system and where does the power sit. So within our education system, for years, it's been a very much a top-down power. We have been told what to do. We've had that prescriptive curriculum. We've been assessed on that curriculum. We've had Estin assessing us as a school on those top-down thought processes, those top-down rules, if you like, for education. Whereas what comes with agency is a reduction of that, and it's about what you do. And actually, it sounds, what Ty spoke then was, it sounds absolutely ideal, and wouldn't you want to work in an education system that's like that? But actually, it's very hard, because what you're having to do is also change those practices that are so ingrained and inbuilt in people, in both those that are working in education, but also families and parents and their thought processes about what education means. So when you particularly talking around assessment and how do they know where children are and that type of thing. So, you can use that word agency as just one little buzzword, but there's a massive connotations when it comes to curriculum reform.
Yeah, sure. You're right. And that transition, it's a very different thing, isn't it? To be starting a new school as you have, to be working in an existing school where, like you say, those habits and ways of working and like professional identities are very sort of ingrained and very hard to move the dial on in a sustainable way. So this word subsidiarity, can we just get into that for a moment? Like, what does it mean? What does that word mean? First of all, like in theory, like what does that word mean? Like, what's the definition of it? And also, what does it look like in practice? What is there more of under this policy of subsidiarity? What is there less of? So first of all, just like, what does it mean?
Well, I think in its simplest form, it is the principle, isn't it, that perhaps a central authority should have a subsidiary function and perform only the tasks that are absolutely necessary and can't be performed at a local level. So if we look at that in terms of government, or here in Wales, we look at that in terms of regional consortia or local authority, within education and particularly curricula and curriculum policy, those organisations, should not serve or contribute to any function that can actually be picked up at a local level, including decision-making, including pedagogy, including assessment, including that self-evaluation, that school improvement cycle, and the idea being that framework and those sort of, those parameters are set, but we have, one of the key aspects of any, sort of like you said, agentic performance or efficacy is trust, isn't it? And that system is trusted and developed and able to perform within that. So I think if you consider autonomy and agency within that, those are two distinct but rather close bedfellows within that principle or that concept of subsidiarity.
Yeah, I see. So like devolving decision making down to the local level as far as possible. And so what does that look like in practice? Could you give us some sort of concrete examples of what subsidiarity looks like in reality in schools and in other organizations?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's about those closest to the practice to make those decisions as well. I think that's a key part of subsidiarity. Again, I'll go back to a phrase I've used quite a bit already in this podcast around that national level framework, that we have a national framework that's available for us as school leaders, but we can take that framework and interpret it to create our curriculum design within our schools on a very sort of local level. For me, within my school, we have a curriculum design that provides our teachers with an overview of how to build themes and how to build learning, but actually they make the decisions of what happens in that classroom. I'm not giving them a scheme of work. I'm not saying, okay, spring term 2, we're back now after half term. Year 1, you do this. Year 2, you do this. Year 6, you're doing this. It's up to staff to make those decisions. I ask them why they're doing it. And as long as they can tell me why, great, carry on. And it's about them to go through those processes of learning and to understand. And it goes back exactly to what Ty just said. It's all around trust. And it's about building in that trust. But quite crucially, it's also about building in time. And it's about making sure that staff, first of all, have that time to actually practice subsidiarity in its truest form, of being able to have those conversations both with their children and with their colleagues to say, this is where I'm taking their learning, this is why I'm doing this, but also time professional learning wise, so that we can sit together as a whole school and that we can see where those themes of learning actually go back up to our curriculum design and where do they fit. So this is not a free-for-all. This is not just a teacher waking up on a snowy morning saying, oh, let's look at the snow today, and then that's the theme for the next 6 weeks. It is structured, but teachers really do have that agency to do what they feel is right for their children and make those pedagogical decisions to support that.
It works on a number of axes, doesn't it? And a number of intersections, actually. And I think while you were talking there, the big one for me is, moving away from that spoonful of medicine, and that wanting to be fed, and our system. We in Wales, for a long time, myself included, we've come through a system where we've been spoon-fed. Autonomy in the system before looked like a national curriculum that was made behind closed doors, delivered to us in boxes, and the autonomy was, can you get on with delivering what's in that document? That was genuinely system autonomy.
That's very familiar.
Yeah, maybe it has echoes. But, the axis of, firstly, if we don't have all the answers, and we as leaders should never claim to have all the answers, and we should never portray ourselves as having all the answers within our organizations, because we don't. If we can face that, as a reflective, proactive leader, surely the system, as it goes up through its tiers, can actually reflect that they can't provide all the answers either. And so for me, it's about that collaborative approach, not just, on an axis alongside colleagues, but it's about myself having freedoms as a head to work with my team and design a set of parameters. It's about my subset of family teams in school designing their parameters and working within that. It's about those teachers when they close the door and they get on with their classroom. And as Kat has said, and I've alluded to, running all the way through that, is support, challenge, and trust.
So my mind is spinning here. Like this is just sounds sort of almost too good to be true. What's happening there? Like it's just like it's and just briefly, you mentioned the 4 purposes earlier, and for the benefit of listeners, I've got them here. So don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to recite them. Don't doubt that you could. So we've got the first one is around ambitious, capable learners, ready to learn throughout their lives. So that seems to me to be like about developing, like growing great learners, essentially, or learner effectiveness is what it's often described as in Wales. The second one is enterprising, creative contributors, ready to play a full part in life and work. And that word enterprising, is that being interpreted in the sense of like sort of entrepreneurship and business, or is that just more like sort of on the creativity side? What is that one? How's that being interpreted?
To be honest, I think both, and also with regards to a sense of resilience, independence, and sort of personal creativity, not just being creative in the larger sense of the word as well. And demonstrating, if you like, that resilience in your own learning and that ability to draw upon something beyond your immediacy.
Yeah, sure. Okay, thank you. The third one is ethical, informed citizens of Wales and the world. And that sounds like this is sort of simultaneously about citizenship and, learning about the way that the world works, but also the ethical thing. It sounds like there's a dollop of like character education in there about, how to be a good person, how to live a good life, like learning about virtues and what have you. And the fourth one is healthy, confident individuals ready to lead fulfilling lives as valued members of society. And all of them linked, like the society, the world, life and work throughout their lives. The language in each of those is about what's happening beyond the school gates. And so it's this very holistic vision of education that's about trying to create a better world. It's not just about like just helping the kids to get better results in the short term. It's this quite an expansive vision for how to create a better world, a better society.
And let's bring it back to brass tacks here. If you were to yourself be able to say, or meet, or work, or coexist with another human, an adult who could demonstrate all 4 of those purposes to the nth degree, you'd be doing really well. They're very hard to argue with, and surely they are, in my mind, a societal ambition, not just ambitions for individuals as well. They're an amalgam. But and you talk about those statements, but for me and increasingly for others as well, what I think we need to be aware that what sits below those, we've got 33 characteristics that sort of underpin them. They aren't trite, throwaway statements, James. And the real passion for me is the fact of how we can use those characteristics and those behaviors and values, as you've quite rightly said, and that moral purpose behind it as well, to sit across from the academic and the progress along that. And we aren't talking a million miles away, are we, from the split screen work of Guy, as you're familiar with, and really trying to push that progress in learning and that continuum alongside what we want for them as human beings. And because of that, it can be and has become slightly superficial and trivialized to some extent, but equally so, it is possibly the most transformational opportunity we've had as an education system ever.
Absolutely. We need to get Graham Donaldson. Just sounds like an enlightened character. I need to get him on the podcast. He's not somebody that I've particularly heard of like much like before, well, apart from this report. But it's absolutely tremendous. And so let's get into some more of the sort of the concrete examples of how this is playing out in terms of policies and practices. And one thing that I'm interested to hear more about is Estyn that we heard from earlier, the Welsh Inspectorate, and that has been reformed, I understand it, in recent years alongside these reforms around the curriculum for Wales. Please, could you just explain a bit about what it used to be like and what it's like now?
Yeah, no problem. I think Estyn, in terms of it as an inspectorate, used to be very much would come into schools. We'd have 3 weeks' notice, and they would come in almost with their clipboards and have a little look around and then make judgments. And that was their role. They were coming in to make judgments. Yes, they look at safeguarding and health and safety, curriculum, teaching and learning, ALN, all the aspects of education. But very much at the end of that visit, they would give you a judgment on the current performance. Then they would give you a judgment on your prospects for the future. And then what would come with that would be a series of recommendations. And it was very much, we would provide a self-evaluation report up front to Estyn before they came in. So they would have a picture of school. They would know what you were working on as a school. You would make sure that they could see everything that happens in a school when they came in for their visits, because you wanted to showcase what was going on. And it was high stakes. We're talking about high stakes accountability here for our schools, and particularly for our school leaders. And I think we were getting to the point in Wales where we were compared on those judgments. And I'm talking about the judgments around excellent, good, adequate, or unsatisfactory. Now, watch out if you were unsatisfactory, and that word adequate just sounds a bit meh. So you were aiming for good and excellent, and there were high stakes around who was getting those, and why you were having these labels attached to you as a school. I don't think schools, particularly in Wales, went down the whole route of putting banners up outside schools to say they were excellent and good, but I think some probably did, because it was such high stakes. And it was, Ty did. He's saying he did. He had excellent, by the way, in a previous school. So
not an inadequate banner outside.
Yeah, he didn't have an inadequate banner. He had an excellent banner. I should absolutely categorically say it was an excellent banner. You put me off my train of thought then. But yeah, so it was high stakes. And I think with the education reform in Wales, Estyn have been part of that. That has been absolutely crucial. So when I talked earlier about the pioneer process, and particularly that process, Ty was leading that. He was in charge of curriculum design from a Welsh Government perspective. He was working alongside Estyn. They were there. They were part of those groups. They were learning alongside practitioners from across Wales, and they were the same as everybody else. And I think that from the beginning, that made a huge, huge point to the education profession. We are learning alongside you. We are not us versus them. They then looked at their structure as a whole in terms of how they inspect, and they made the brave decision themselves to do away with judgments. So they now provide a narrative report on school. I can speak, I was inspected back in October last year. As the head teacher, I was what they call the nominee. I was part of the inspection team. I was included in every conversation that happened. They do much more in terms of learning walks across the school rather than going in with a clipboard and observing a lesson for a whole hour, then move to the next lesson. They still had lengthy observations, but they're not putting judgments on teachers either. And I think that changed the whole outlook of inspection. So when I got the call, we now have a 10-day notice period. When I got the call, I wasn't like, oh my gosh, quick, I've got to tidy up the self-evaluation report. We don't have self-evaluation reports anymore that we have to give them. We have to provide you a couple of documents in advance of them arriving at the school. And they arrive at the school and they want to know your story. So the first thing, I sat down, I had 6 inspectors, and I had 15 minutes, which for those who know me, if I would know, that's very difficult for me to only talk about my school for 15 minutes. But that's what I had. I had 15 minutes to say, right, what is your story? Tell us your story. And I did. And then it was up to the inspection team to actually go through. Obviously, they have their regulations, they have the things they have to look at. And then they went through and completed that. But at the end of every day, I was part of their team discussions. I was able to say things like, oh, no, we do that, or it looks like this, or you picked up this, actually, this is what it means for us in our school. And that was absolutely crucial, and being part of that process. And then at the end, it's quite funny, you don't get a shiny badge anymore. You don't get to put the banner up anymore outside your school. And what do you get? You get a narrative. And I know from talking to colleagues, some heads are like, oh, well, okay, it's good. But actually, secretly, I want to still be told I'm excellent or I'm good. And for others, myself included, and I am an achievement junkie, what it did do was take away that pressure. And during that inspection, I just went with it because I knew that it was going well. I was getting those vibes, but actually, ultimately, they weren't going to stick a label on me or a badge on me. So it took away a lot of that heightened anxiety around judgments, which was really good.
Yeah, and from your teachers, I imagine.
Oh, huge. Yeah. I think one thing that is interesting, though, that didn't suit our school, if I'm completely honest, was around that level of lesson observation and having those external people coming into our school. We've got a very open culture within our school. We have collaborative approach to observation. And so people coming in, it was still very much high stakes for my teachers, and because they care and they're passionate. But I think very much as the week went on and they could see that these inspectors were normal human people that smiled and wanted to know what was happening in our school, they relaxed massively. And the children as well, they wanted to know, they wanted to learn and find out about our school.
And I think the big thing in just listening there, Kat, isn't it? And for me, having recently been inspected too, is the level of professional dialogue that I was able to engage with, which didn't exist in the previous system and probably doesn't exist in other systems. But, coming back to James's original sort of point as well is, why is this coming about in this change? It's, with so much policy and intent and purpose change in our system, we needed to have an inspectorate that was in step or more in step with measuring those policies, and I don't know how many people are aware of this, and it's, it's quite a dull aside perhaps, but, there is a standing board of international inspectorates. And part of that is the fact that inspections, internationally, should reflect the nature and the purpose of education policy. So in Wales, we needed to address that. And part of that was a review. And here's his name again, so you definitely need him on. That review was led by one Professor Graham Donaldson. And it's an interesting read, actually. And for anybody who wants to look at it, you simply have to Google a learning inspectorate. And it unpicks and references, the Bratislava memorandum that says around the purpose and how inspections should be held in that professional and that sort of statutory way across countries. And then it walks through what he found when he looked at our inspectorate and really held a mirror up to it, So there's some really sort of pointed findings in there. And then it's got clear guidelines and recommendations for how the inspectorate should take a phased approach to implementing that. So I think the concept of having a learning inspectorate in itself could probably benefit yourselves and your colleagues in England.
Well, wouldn't it just? I mean, there's an inquiry that's about to start, I think. Lord Jim Knight is overseeing it into Ofsted, and people have been looking at this for a long time. There's been I think Labour have got on their they're one of the few things that they've said that they'll do if they get into power is that they'll reform Ofsted, not get rid of it, but to reform it and to make it more supportive and so on. That phrase that you just used, Ty, professional dialogue, was just ringing out from what Kat said, and it just sounds like it's so much more respectful. Like there's just this sense of there's this horrible fear that has become associated with Ofsted, where the getting the call is like, and we wouldn't get 10 days or 3 weeks notice, we would get like 1 day's notice or 2 days notice, and there's just this fearful shock of like adrenaline that goes through you, this sense that they're coming to find you out for being that is deficit model. It's just like, how can we catch you being rubbish? And it's very disrespectful to a profession of really, really hardworking, tired, compassionate, caring people who are doing their best. And And that just really comes through. And also, like, it sounds like it's quite strengths based. It allows you to lead with your front foot and say, here's what we're doing really well, and here are some areas that we think we could work on.
Absolutely. And I think, James, on that note, it enabled me to be very honest as well, and just be like, this is my school. This is what's happening right now in my school. These are the children. These have been the the challenges post pandemic. This is the community that I'm in. I can't change these things, but this is what we're doing to try to support. And they were very open. And what they weren't doing was saying, well, this is what X school down the road looks like, or this is what the previous school I inspected. They didn't have that. They were very open and very respectful in your school, your journey.
There's a number of things to consider alongside that, isn't it? Let's not be naive in trying to sell that it's the perfect picture either. Coining one of Graham's phrases, I think personally, so far so good. You can't argue with that. But as you said there, Kat, as well, what I also felt is that you didn't have that tooth and nail fight. You were going to die in a ditch over a grade, and I didn't have that. And actually, as a professional, I was prepared to let some things go that perhaps I didn't 100% agree with. But, was it worth the extra 300 heartbeats a minute? No, it wasn't, because we run a good school, we look after our children, and they get a really bloody good education from it. So that dialogue was helpful. I had some really good advice off my inspectors. Wow, that was amazing. I made 3 pages of notes of things I should look at as a head. Yeah, I actually took it away as a little bit of professional learning. Imagine that. Wow. But I think the challenge you've got is with any organizational change, and is the fact that the intent and the drive from the review and the policy direction and the leadership, it will take time to filter down through the system, because it is ultimately relying, whether it likes it or not, on a cascade model. So, and what you've got, and inevitably in any system where small pods of a large group go out and they see and work in different contexts, you're going to have mass variability, and you're going to depend upon who turns up on that Monday morning, and I don't think we're ever going to get away from that. But I think if we stick to our principles and the intent, and we grow that agency and trust, coming back to what we were talking about earlier, and we make sure that we are afforded the ability to make those sensible decisions at our level, well, it can surely only improve and carry on going in the right way.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And just quickly, just as I was talking about the deficit model there, you mentioned an acronym a little while ago, Kat, ALN, which for the benefit of people on this side of the border and elsewhere is additional learning needs. And in this country, we call it SEND, we call it special educational needs and disabilities. And it's just such a deficit set of language, that, isn't it, to associate people with particular learning needs with disabilities in the same thing, as though it's just like you're sort of disabled, you're sort of you're sub par or whatever it might be, so normal, for that horrible word that was used not so long ago. Additional learning needs just seems like such a much more inclusive and lovely and accurate way to describe that. I wondered, is that a recent shift as well, this move to ALN? Is that a part of this whole thing?
Yeah, so as well as having a curriculum reform and an accountability reform and ESTIM reforming and professional learning reforming and all the other reforms, we've also had an ALN, an additional learning needs reform in Wales. So Welsh Government haven't done anything, by half really. The ALN Act has come into force now, and very much that's about putting the individual at the centre of all the practices. And it's about schools obviously making sure we have an additional learning needs coordinator, predominantly who should be a leader within our schools, who leads this work. And we very much look at a person-centred approach. So making sure our children who demonstrate additional learning needs, that they're at the centre, and then we look at the provision that we can provide. So is it that universal provision that should be happening in every classroom anyway, regardless of funding or support, extra adults? Just what are we going to do within our natural teaching and pedagogical decisions to support all children, because they're all different? Then we have a specialised support, where we're really looking at what do these children need to be able to thrive? What do they actually need that is more specific for those children? And that's where we're able to pull on agencies. And I think we are, as a school, personally speaking, but also nationally speaking, I think ALN reform has been huge for us. but it's a long, long way to go, particularly in terms of funding. You know, we are massively underfunded in being able to provide support for our children. I'm very fortunate within my school. I've got a learning resource base as well, which is part of my school. So I have 10 children with significant additional learning needs and 4 members of staff in that classroom to support them. They are the greatest addition to my school. And you talk about inclusivity, they are very much part and parcel of our school. And like I said, it's an absolute privilege to be able to care and support children in a mainstream setting that have those needs, because we were able to give them the right provision because they come first as individuals. And I think that's been the strength of the new ALN Act.
Absolutely, Kat. And I think, you know, it's about the ability, again, we come back to it, isn't it? The trust and agency that we have to be able to deliver and, you know, engage in personalized, individualized, you know, curricula, meeting, you know, those learners where they are, you know, and go into them. And I think that's key. And you're right. It's about, you know, the system resourcing that now. And as you said, you know, through your experiences there, and myself, I've got 2 areas in my school currently being converted. And one of them will be a support in resource base for children with ASD, another with children with high degrees of trauma, making sure that they are part and parcel of our school community, you know, and our understanding. And you know, our ethical informed decisions, James.
Yeah, thank you. So let's round off this part of the conversation soon. There's so much more I would like to talk to you about, but also there's other things I want to hear more about you, and we need to think about rethinking education more widely. One of these is about evaluation. Those 4 purposes, as we heard earlier, are very expansive. This is not only about exam grades, although exam grades is one way of measuring this stuff. But, you know, to create ethical, informed citizens of Wales and the world, you know, to be having lifelong learners who are enterprising and able to solve problems and all of that stuff, that's all quite difficult to measure. And so I'm sort of just wondering about, for the benefit of listeners, Ty is punching the air. So, and yeah, that's Rick. So let's just start with that. Why were you punching the air there, Ty?
Well, it should be difficult to measure, you know. I'm going to put it back to you and say, why do you want to measure it? You know, measures and accountability has gone from the traditional concept of measuring a system to measuring an individual, and that's where it's gone completely wrong. You know, it's fallen foul of its own self-importance, if you like. And I think that's part of our reform here. You know, we've got a growing accountability and improvement system here, and an emerging one. I'm not saying that actually I think that particularly is going down the right road, but, you know, Estin is very much a positive part of that. But, you know, we need to be very careful. You know, the cliches abound here in classrooms and head teacher meetings up and down the land. You know, continually weighing that pig does not improve or fatten that pig, does it? You know, it's really important that we understand that, you know, the purpose behind measuring, what is it? Is it to make the system feel better about what it does? Is it to make the head teachers feel better about their school? Or is it to actually support and improve and move that learner forward? Now, 4 purposes, if you like, and you could guarantee me a child who had been embraced and engaged and stimulated across those 4 purposes over 10 A stars, I'd take that every time, James. Okay? And the reason why it's hard to measure is because we're human and we're people, and it's important and it's dynamic and it's fluid, isn't it? It's relational. And those are all the key points. This is what we do. I didn't get into teaching to measure people, you know, and as much of a shock as that might be to colleagues, you know, I got into teaching because I like people, I like children, I like working with them, and I like seeing people flourish and grow and actually have a little bit of a light turned on as well, and a passion. You know, what is there? You know, even by the fact that you brought up the word measure has stimulated and set my goosebumps and hair sticking up, and you can tell I'm getting animated because it is not about measure. Measure should be telling the system, you know, at a high level that we're going in the right direction and there's improvement, or we're doing the right or the wrong things. What measure has been taken to is, and as you've said, is being a punitive tool, you know, and it's being used in the wrong way. Now, why would you want to measure, and how would you anyway, in a really sort of any kind of way, a meaningful way, why would you want to measure how much more ethical you're becoming? For what purpose? surely it's about the process of becoming more ethical. It's about the learning. It's the engagement. It's that dialogic kind of approach. It's that ability to communicate, to work as an individual, as part of a wider society, to see consequences, cause and effect. You know, I can't even begin to start on pushing back there. And part of it is because it triggers me, admittedly. Part of it is because actually Kat and I have got colleagues who are trying to distill it and measure it down. Now,
That's what I was going to get in. If I can get a word in edgeways.
sorry.
No, Anna, yeah.
What I want to go back to is, if you give me a measure about characteristics, about attributes, about behaviors, about qualities, you know, we would all need to sit and have a long conversation about the validity of what that data was. And for what purpose would you collect that data? Would you want the UK saying, we are 42% more ethically informed as a nation, when we all know and are watching the news and worrying about Braverman and knowing that that isn't true, you know? For what purpose would that come to light?
Okay, I'm going to jump in now while he takes a little breath. I think, you know, I agree with everything that Ty has said there, but also I think it's about the purpose of the 4 purposes, and the intent of the 4 purposes was never from an assessment perspective. The problem in the system in Wales is some people do try to do that. There is a definite we call a lot old brain thinking. So, you know, using those mechanisms and those measures that we've had before within our system in Wales and just saying, well, yeah, they're ethically informed, tick. Or they've reached progression step 1, tick. That is not the intent of Curriculum for Wales. And so there is still massive work to go within our system. Although, yes, we've got these great 4 purposes and we've got a great national framework that is supporting understanding. What's happening in schools across Wales as a whole is still a very mixed picture, I would say, in terms of assessment and progression. There is an assessment strategy that sort of goes alongside the National Curriculum for Wales. And we've been fortunate enough to be part of developing and designing that. We sit on the National Assessment Group. And I think that is about really making sure that each individual child is supported and challenged appropriately. And the purpose of that assessment strategy is that ongoing day-to-day basis. It's not about those checkpoints at the end of year 2 or the end of year 6 or the end of year 9 or SATs. And, you know, we don't have that. So we don't have those measures that are driving what is happening within schools, but also those 4 purposes. And the intent is never that they are measured. Because as Ty said, you can't say, you know, 42% are ethically informed and tick a box.
And we've deliberately engineered the text, the product, to be difficult to do that with, James. But in effect, that is also the challenge our professionals are having, because they're saying, you know, we want, and they were given a blank sheet, and now they want a filled-in set of cells and boxes because, you know, that's a lot easier. And so that's possibly part of the tension in the system. But Kat's point there was really astute in the fact that parts of our curriculum that we work around, these progression steps, are actually sort of underpinned, if you like, by descriptions of learning that are misconstrued. And there's a misconception out there that they are designed for an assessment purpose, but they were deliberately designed through a research project between University of Wales, Trinity St David and Glasgow University, actually as planning tools. Now, there's a step that needs to happen, as we all know as educators, between planning something and then assessing it. And believe me, that's the heavy lifting of being a practitioner. And so we're actually putting those practitioners in front of that heavy lifting and getting them to think in that way. And if you're only given the tools to plan, you know, surely again, we come back to that agency, that subsidiarity of how we're going to do this as well. So I've come down off my horse now. I'm really apologizing.
No, it's an interesting. That is absolutely fascinating. Thank you. And I agree that, like, measure is a loaded word, right? It is sort of it summons up the idea of a meter stick with a marker on it, and that there's a standard, and that some people are substandard and all of that stuff. But there's also, you know, I mean, maybe if we use different language, if we talk about capture what's happening, or to research what's happening, or to explore what's happening, to sort of to try to get a sense of the extent to which those purposes are being fulfilled, you know, like those are good questions to ask, which it's more of a sort of like a bottom up approach to capturing what's going on, rather than this sort of deductive top-down thing. It's more like inductive, bottom-up, like grounded theory for both of you doing doctorates. Like sort of, yeah, like working with, and that was the way that I analysed my interview data in my PhD. You know, you just like, you get a big corpus of text and you just see what's in it. And you look for themes and patterns that emerge out of what's happening, which would be maybe a smarter way of going about it. And but it is, so you're saying that there are people who are the bean counters, if you like, are still dusting off their clipboards and trying to capture this and fire up spreadsheets and what have you.
Absolutely. And you know, coming back to your ground up theory, you know, I think you've just qualified to work in Wales with that understanding. So well done. You can come over anytime you like. But you're right. And Kat and I sort of try and unpick this. It's not just the system, it's actually colleagues. And it's through, you know, I think being at the partial loss of what to do when it's left to you. I think there's probably partially through an absence in quality and concrete professional learning and understanding and a depth of understanding, and partially, and I use the word to blame here with you know, air quotes, I think it's the stage that we're at in the journey as well. And I think everybody, whether it be, you know, mass education reform or teaching a lesson, wants to be able to pin down progress or movement forward in a minutiae and detail. And I think, you know, statutory speaking, you know, we're not even a year into this new way of working. So, you know, we're 7 months in and already people are trying to sort of pin it down and say it's definitely going to be like this for good. And it removes that opportunity of evolution from it. But you're right when you talk about the capture for us with learners, and Kat is very far down this road. It's about getting that holistic picture. It's about encouraging and enabling the climate for learners to be more at the heart, not just of their learning, but actually of their reflective process of their learning as well, and the commenting and the identification of where they need to go in their learning. It's pulling teachers into that. And for us, one of the big steps that I didn't think would be a big step for colleagues was actually in a previous school and working towards it in my current school is putting children at the heart of what we previously referred to as parents' evenings. And our year 5 and our year 6 children actually leading their own parents' evenings and talking to their parents based on prior conversations with their teachers about how they do well, how they learn best. How can you help me as a mum, as a dad, as a grandparent, you know, as a carer? And where do I fall down and why do I fall down? And it's about putting that holistic picture, again, coming back to what they've learned and how they've learned, being, if you like, 2 lanes along that road, underpinned by why they're learning it. And, we're talking about curriculum there, and I know that's another conversation, and that's a big conversation of why we do what we do in our curriculum as well.
Thank you for that. Do you have anything to add to that, Kat?
I just think from a practical level and from a school level, it echoes our work on assessment, and particularly around that understanding of progress, echoes the themes sort of through this podcast around agency, trust, time. It all goes back to that, because as a school leader, I've had to put time in so that we as colleagues professionally, we can sit together and we can talk about how we know children are making progress. If we haven't got these fixed endpoints, we used to have like level criteria that we could work towards and tick children off a list and have these sliding scales of improvement or flight paths. We've been through all of this. And I was like the data queen as a deputy head, and I absolutely loved a good graph and to show where children started and where they got to. And well done, we did a great job. And I've had to do so much unlearning and unthinking myself as a school leader to be able then to support my staff. But the biggest thing has been when I'm sat in a room now and talking about the progress of every individual child with their teacher, and they're just talking, they're not bringing books, they're not showing evidence. I have to trust what they are saying. And also, even from my, that NQT, the newly qualified teacher in their first year of practice, they're able to talk about where the children are because they're with them every single day. And then it's my job to say, well, do they need anything additional? Do they need anything to challenge them a bit further or to support them in that thinking and build up that system within the school? So, as Ty said, from a leadership perspective, there is still, I think, nervousness amongst colleagues because it's about letting go and it's about changing those systems of how we've worked previously. And we're still very much as a nation very early in this journey. It only became statutory in September. However, I think where more things are happening, like more Eston inspections, where they're recognising, schools that are going down this route of a holistic view of assessment and understanding the progress children are making, that is giving the system more confidence. And then hopefully that will continue. The danger in the system is that Welsh Government don't hold their nerve. They've got to hold their nerve then at that political level of saying, actually, we don't want to have those facts and figures on children in year 2. We don't need to have information on what happens when they leave primary school in their English and their maths and their science year, which we've had previously. And so we rely, one, on as an individuals to not fuel that, but also systemically, Welsh Government need to hold their nerve and allow us this time and this agency as well.
Nothing makes a minister feel more comfortable than being provided by.
And the same with head teachers, Ty, isn't it? That we've had that comfortableness, if that's even a word, when we would get the data packs through in the autumn term, because then we could go to governors and say, look how great we are. And it was just gaming. It was just attributing numbers to children, which is fundamentally wrong. I'll get on my high horse now. You started me off on assessment. And the way we're working now is about understanding every child as an individual.
And let's be careful as well, because we've fluctuated here. I've noticed in the conversation as well. We've talked about accountability and assessment, and we need to be careful because colleagues talk about it. Language is, and we've had a theme running through this conversation already. Language is vital, and having a shared definition and a common understanding of a language is vital to improvement. And really following some of, Becky Calzone's tweets as well this week. Really pushing that, the language of learning and making sure how that underpins us. I think as a system, not just as a school. But something you said right at the beginning there, Kat, that stimulates something that you always bang on about, really, isn't it? And I think here, James, you might hear a confession from Kat. You're definitely going to get one from me, okay? And I think I should whisper this, but I quite like the OECD. Okay, a lot of education materials. We're talking about leadership and trust and agency. Something that Kat pushes quite well and takes advantage of is something around the work that they've done on learning organisations around the 4 transversal themes, isn't it, Kat? About, trust, time, technology and thinking. If a leader is able to put energy and effort and consideration into those 4 aspects, I think you would struggle to fail.
Yeah, I am. I'll say it out loud. I'm a big fan of the OECD. I'm not whispering it. And for those reasons, that the whole school as a learning organisation model, we've actually used from the day that we opened and still use very much as that structure for our school. For the whole of our school system is built around the school as a learning organisation model. And I think I would definitely attribute the success, I would say, in terms of the consistency and our consistent focus on learning to using that model.
And I just quickly ask, because when I very first came across that phrase, school is a learning organisation, I just thought, well, obviously a school is a learning organisation. That's what it is. Well, can you just quickly define that for the benefit of listeners? What does that phrase mean to you?
That's what I would quite often start many a presentation with, James, in as much as schools should be focused on learning. The schools are not. So many schools are focused on the wrong things. They're focused on judgments, on accountability, on being excellent, on making sure that they do X, Y, and Z. And they actually lose that focus on learning. And I think, alongside some of the early curriculum reforms in Welsh Government with the curriculum, there was also the professional learning reform. And we worked alongside people like Louise Stahl and Marco O'Cools, and they looked at what would a school as a learning organisation model actually look like for Wales. So we've actually have a model now that is very unique to Wales. And why it's unique is it has the 4 purposes at the heart of it. So it's recognising that those 4 purposes are actually there for us as organisations within Wales as well. And that school as a learning organisation model sits around 7 elements. And those elements are looking at things like creating a vision for learning. And again, that might sound so basic and so simple, but how many times do school leaders actually go back, revisit the vision and actually make sure it's focused on learning? Or does it just sit as a little paragraph on a website or in a prospectus and it ticks the box? We've had these hard conversations and this focus for quite a while now within our schools. The model also looks at things, particularly around professional learning, how we build in those continuous learning opportunities for our staff. How can we promote team learning and collaboration? How do we learn from the external system? We can't just close our doors down. The whole point of Curriculum for Wales is that we learn and work with others as well. How do we exchange that information? How do we build a culture of inquiry? So all of these elements feed into us being a learning organisation, and they're very much action orientated in its work.
I think replacing the word organisation with organism would actually make more sense. And it's not about the learning perhaps that necessarily happens in the classroom, James, which I think was what you were alluding to. It's actually having the infrastructure of the organism learning from its successes and its failures. And Kat's right. The difference of the work that the OECD put in around Wales's reform there was the fact that it went right across to those 68 recommendations and put those 4 purposes right at the heart. So we've got in the centre, we've got the learning that happens with learners. And then around that, we've got those 7 key elements that, as Kat has talked about, some of them that actually drive the infrastructure that allows that to happen in a successful way.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm really glad that I asked that question. So as you say, it's early days still. This is the first year that it's been statutory. I feel like we should maybe do a check-in each year for the next few years, just to see how things are going. And maybe bring in some of our colleagues from the implementation pilot. Thank you for that. I really, really enjoyed it, and it's just super exciting. My goodness, my heart has been singing as we've been talking for so many reasons. This is just it's happening. It's happening, just over the border. And my goodness, wouldn't it be nice if we could learn these lessons over here as well? So this is to be continued. But for now, let's park that and talk about both of you, and to hear a little bit more about your own, starting with your own experience of education. What was you're familiar with this format as avid fans of the podcast. And so what was your school like? What was your experience of school like, and your later education? And then we'll do the school first of all, and we'll go Kat, then Ty. And then we'll do this significant learning bits, the sort of the moments that really shaped you as people. And then we'll do that again, one then the other. And then we'll move into the rethinking education stuff. So Kat, over to you first. What was your school like? Where did you go to school?
Okay, so I am a Newport girl, as they say, and born and bred, and still a head teacher in Newport now. And I absolutely love school. I actually prepared for this question, James, and I asked my mum. I said, what was I like in school? And her response was, from the first day I started reception, I basically wanted to learn, and I went in skipping, didn't even turn around and say goodbye, and loved learning. And I suppose that is still with me now, and I think I had been very fortunate through all of my education experiences. I went to an infant school, then I moved to a different area within Newport, so I went to a different junior school, then a secondary school. And along the way, there have been significant teachers that I can still remember to this day, still in touch with. And they really shaped me. And I suppose why did they shape me is because they believed in me. And that's all it went down to. It just went down to relationships. And I just loved learning. I sort of immersed myself in absolutely everything. Ty will probably laugh at this, but I was also a little bit of an achievement junkie, and I know he sits open mouthed to listeners that can't see his face right now, but that also was to my detriment. So when I got to more sort of GCSEs and into A levels, I never ever failed at anything. And that was huge for me, because I got to A levels and that whole change of system, and I'm talking late 90s. I was doing my A levels around 97, 1998. And I started to really struggle because I was thrown into a world of working on my own, and having to research and to do these things. And I couldn't cope with it. And actually, there were a number of times when my dad used to have to come and pick me up from school because I was ill. I wasn't ill. I actually couldn't cope. So I had fantastic teachers that really supported that. Got my A-level results and didn't get exactly as I wanted. I had very good grades, but not in the right subject areas. So my whole dream was to be a writer and to go to Birmingham University to do English. They accepted me, and I had to say, can you please not let me in? because I don't want to do English anymore. And I fell in love then with psychology and ended up in Cardiff University doing a BSc in psychology. And that really shaped my thinking and has definitely, interestingly, they told me that I couldn't be a teacher with a psychology degree. Work that one out. But I did manage to get onto a PGCE and again managed to, just love learning. And I suppose that's what's guided me. So relationships first and foremost, but how that's shaped where I am now, I very much now want children. And with my own daughter, that experience of failure is absolutely key, because at the age of 17, 18, experience it for the first time was tough. And I remember it being tough.
My son's going through the same thing. He's in year 12 at the moment, and he's like, people talk about the year 12 wall as though you just like hit it hard and fast, but it's not quite like that. It's much more of a slow motion, like sort of crashing into a wall. And and there are some bits of what he's doing that are going really well, like because he's a smart kid and he's able to pay attention in lessons and he's doing well on the tests and stuff, but he also knows that he's really behind in terms of workload. And we've just been talking lots about habits, like habit formation, and really hard to change hard-won habits.
But I think, James, something you said there is really apt, because nobody spoke to me about those at that time, because it wasn't something you did at that time. So nobody talked to me about who I was as a learner or any of the habits I was from, because they just didn't. It was just that era in education where you were told something and you did it. And that's, I suppose, why I'm so determined as a head teacher to develop that love for learning and have those sort of learner capacities and that metacognition, and really push that through our work in our school, because I didn't have that and I struggled without it.
Thank you. So over to you, Ty. Thank you for that, by the way. It's really interesting. What was your experience of school?
Mine was quite varied, actually, James. I grew up in a small mining town in the South Wales valleys, and it was a small primary school existence. And there's two moments within that school, or two things in that school, that stand out to me in primary school. One of them was me winning a mock national election, and having to campaign and design the campaign and persuade the school to vote for me. What I don't reveal, if I ever reflect on it, that it was a shoo-in in the South Wales valleys, because I was given the Labour candidacy. So that was a run-in. I didn't really reflect on that at the time. And there was...
You just took it as all about you.
It was all about me. And the second biggest impact, it's a strange one. We had a teacher, and I remember him fondly now. He was stern, he was upright, he was very clipped, a great figure and a real presence in the classroom. But if I had finished and got through the work he'd set, it wouldn't be about giving me extra work or sending me on an errand with a little folded pieces of paper or all the other things that seemed to happen around me. He would call me out and I would get to sit at his desk and he would play chess with me. And he would not just play chess with me, but he actually taught me the rigor and the love of the game. And it was those moments that he talked to me, and it still sits with me now. He talked to me as if he saw, and he was talking to what I could be, not to what I was, and not to just another kind of, random young valley zoik, if you like, in his classroom, and those two things sat with me hugely. There was a huge disruption in my education caused by Margaret Thatcher, and I didn't know her personally. But what she did was she actually took away my dad's employment, including down the coal mines. And we as a family ended up pretty much as the majority of families did in the South Wales valleys and the north of England. We ended up with nothing, and we had no choice. So we actually lost everything as a family. And my father was not willing to join the lines at the Dole office, and he was not willing for us to sort of recede into that sort of, what I would call it is a very kind of plateaued grey existence, and a lack of aspiration that sort of descended upon those areas for a long period of time. And he packed us all up and we went to live in South Africa. So I saw a very different side of the world. I saw a very different side of schooling, and some really sort of big moments there in education. For me, was the first time I was caned as a child. That still sits with me. And actually, the first time I was caned wasn't my fault, but there was an all for one and a one for all attitude in the school we were in. And if there was misbehavior from one child, the whole class were caned. So that's the way we operated.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, that's an interesting concept there. And then there was a second momentous occasion where I corrected a teacher's spelling that she'd written on the board, the blackboard. I remember it now. She'd misspelled aeroplane. She'd actually spelled it without the first E. And I also remember the shoe from her foot glancing the side of my head as she threw it for me for speaking out of turn. So, if you like, that one experience in that small valley school and that very different, experience in that real sort of hardline South African, what was basically a foreign national school, almost prep school in a way, have shaped me and brought me to a point where for me it's about the opportunity of seeing that child as the adult. And for me, it's about lifting the lid and, giving them the chair to look over the fence, however you want to address it. I've got a real passion for, lifting children up and giving them the opportunity. Now, something always sat with me when I first started teaching, and it was a conversation in the staff room where parents, were looked down upon by colleagues because they had gone to the school I was in, they were in the area I was in, and they hadn't moved off anywhere else. And for me, that they were missing the crux of it. Some of those parents, yes, were there because they hadn't had a choice. Some were there because they'd had a choice. But for me, it doesn't matter what you do as long as you are provisioned and furnished with the climate that gives you that option and that choice. And if you decide to stay and grow up and contribute back to that area that you grew in, so be it. That's great. If you have to do that and there's no other option, that's for me where the problems creep in as well. And there's a little bit of synergy, I think, with your son and Kat's story here. Really good memory, very good recall. Flew GCSEs, highest grades my school had ever seen at the time, and really struggled at A-level. And it took me less than 4 weeks to realise that it wasn't me, it was the school that wasn't furnishing me with the right kind of approach, I think, as well as perhaps a little bit of me and not being able to manage myself in that way. And I actually ended up going and doing my A-levels, ironically, in a year and getting them out the way in college. And as I did that, I was destined to go to university and go through. And I actually pressed the pause button and said, what if I did something I wanted to do and not what the system expected? And then there are a number of times in my life where I've thrown those runestones up, James, just sometimes perhaps to see where they land. And where they landed at that time, at 17, I found myself enlisting in the army. And so I joined the army and became a young soldier.
This was back here. How long were you in South Africa for?
We were only living there for 2.5 years.
What years were they, out of interest?
The years of that would have been, let me think there now, that would have been 87 to 89. So just before.
I see. So pre Mandela. Mandela came out of prison in about 90, I think, didn't he?
Yes, he did. It was in the height of apartheid. There was a real pre that Mandela release. There was a real surge of political unrest, and it was a bubbling hotspot. To be honest,
I'm reading a book about that at the moment. Sorry, just as a bit of an aside, I've read an amazing book. I really recommend it, called Knowing Mandela by this journalist called John Carlin. It's only a slim little book, but it's just absolutely fascinating. But and I'm very aware that was an unbelievably volatile period of time.
And can you imagine, as a 10, 11-year-old Welsh Valleys child living with what now we are fully aware of in a very white privileged apartheid-based community and society? My mind boggles when I think about what did that do for me, and how was that? It's just bizarre, and worlds apart. And I think in itself is probably a short story worth writing in itself,
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So to come back, so you came back and enlisted in the army.
Yeah, came back, joined the army. Didn't really know what I wanted to do in the army. Again, along Kat's line, quite a good achiever. Another sort of achievement, and you sit tests when you join the army, and Barb tests. And at the time, it was the highest score that had been seen in the recruitment office in Cardiff. And some careers popped up that I didn't really know about, sounded intriguing, and I ended up working for British military intelligence for several years, James. So, and as they say, sort of got the T-shirt, watched the video, wore the hat. And it was during that time that I found myself in what is referred to as a super sanger, or a sanger, a fortified tower. It was actually on a wet and windy night in Belfast, in Northern Ireland. And I looked out. I was, in that sort of moment, if you like, that beta moment between being fully awake and just drifting off into unconsciousness and trying to stay awake. And I just sat up and looked around and just thought, what am I doing with my life? What is this about? I was spending my time and my days dealing with situations that were very, very reductive. Like you said, they were very negative. There was very few people pleased to see us, and pleased with the work that we're doing. And on the side, I'd started working with a local group of children who were children of forces personnel. And I was finding I was getting more of a life buzz and enjoyment from that than I ever did from the role that I was doing. So that's the point where I decided to leave. And I left and I applied to become a teacher. And then I got accepted as a mature student. And at the same time, I deferred the entry and went and spent a year traveling around the world. So, and coming back then to get onto teaching, as they say, the rest is history, if you like.
Wow, fascinating. My goodness. I mean, we've heard quite a few moments of significant learning there, but we'll maybe revisit that in a moment. So let's go back to Kat. What are the moments of significant learning that you can identify that have really shaped your thinking or shaped the trajectory of your life?
I think that one of the significant ones for me was making that decision the day of A-level results coming out and saying, I changed my mind. I don't want to be a writer anymore. I want to look at psychology. And my mum and dad were like, what on earth? Why are you thinking about this right now? And I think I had that from nowhere came this bravery inside of me to say, it doesn't sit right with me. I have to do what is in my heart right now. And I think from that moment on, I have very much led with my heart. And I think I very much have always gone with that. And I didn't up until that point. That was a definite moment for me. I think looking back through once I became a teacher, I've had, amazing opportunities, particularly of people believing in me, investing in me. And I was very fortunate to be became a deputy head in my 4th year of teaching for a large infant school at the time. And again, a massive significant moment, walking into that building with colleagues that were old enough to be my mum. And I was there, this young thing that was taking over as the deputy head and was going to be leading them, and where do you start? And the head teacher at the time had a lot of faith in me and still has a lot of faith in me, but particularly, supported me in that way and showed me how to be that compassionate and values-based leader. So I think that was a huge significance there. And then obviously I can't forget getting the job of my dreams and going for that, job. And I can still remember going into that interview. It was a 2-day interview. I came away from day 1 thinking, all right, I'm happy. I couldn't do any more. Walked into day 2 and thought, oh, I can't see any other people. What's going on here? Texting my mum very quickly. There's only me here. Not quite sure what this means. And realised afterwards and found out afterwards I was the only one called back for day 2 of the interviews. And but then it was a bit like that all or nothing, wasn't it? If I didn't get the job, I'd lost it against myself. So that feeling was just enormous. And then I hit the ground running. I got the job, and then the next day I was straight into meetings to decide the name of the school, the logo, what was going to happen. There would always been somebody very, very significant in my life as well. My dear Nana. So my Nana came from Scotland to Wales, emigrated, as we would say in those days, sort of late 60s, I think it was, and moved to Wales. She was an absolute powerhouse of a woman. She was 5'0", but you would not mess with my Nana. And actually, the more I think about her, the more she really led the way. In International Women's Day yesterday, she really led the way for gender equality. She went to work when all of her friends would stay at home and cook and clean. And she stood up to my papa and saying, no, this is my money and I'm doing what I want with it. We're going on this holiday. She wasn't your typical housewife as people were in those days. And she very much was my guide through my life. My mum and dad couldn't afford to send me to university. And my dad actually gave up a very good career to become a Baptist minister, very similar timing that I went to university. So he gave up a huge income to become a Baptist minister and was going back and forth to university in London. So my nana paid for me to go through university and it was always by my side. And the day I became a head, she was just the proudest person ever. But sadly and very, very quickly, 3 days after I got the job of my dreams, my nana passed away. So that was such a huge turning point for me. And what I didn't do was process that enough, because what I did do as the achievement junkie that I am is I threw myself into work. So I think as I opened Jubilee Park, I had this niggle constantly about my nana and what was I going to do. And I just had to try and channel that into, I'm doing the best I can. And I want to show, that I can do what I can do, because she always had that belief in me. And I suppose that was hugely significant for me. And then I can't forget my darling girl either. I was, somebody probably would have described me in my early leadership role as person that would get it done, but probably didn't have much empathy, probably had very little emotional intelligence in my early leadership days. And then my daughter came along, Lola Rose, and she's 11 now. And I think she has taught me to also have a life and to also take that step back, have that different viewpoint of education and of work, and I think that has really supported my thinking and sort of helped me. So those two, becoming a mum, getting the job of my dreams, losing my nana, has all come together in this sort of like concoction of where I am now, and in a very good place. And loving, started a doctorate then in September 2019, so in 4th year now of doctoral studies, and also loving that. So yeah, that's a pit stop of my challenges and key moments.
Wow. Thank you for sharing all of that. It's incredible. What's your doctorate theme as the final question on this?
Okay, so my theme is around creating the conditions to thrive, and what I'm exploring is the interrelationship between organisational culture, collaboration and teacher well-being through a narrative inquiry. So really wanting to hear the lived experiences of teachers. Very much teachers are put in the box of teachers, and you think of how many there are, we're all so different. I think I'm very much focusing on South Wales and teachers in South Wales, particularly at the moment, around curriculum reform as well, and getting their lived experiences and sort of saying, if you're in culture within an organisation shapes behaviours, it shapes action. So what happens within those organisations then will look at the levels of collaboration and how much time that's afforded and priority that's afforded for teachers, and then how ultimately does that impact teacher well-being. And I'm hoping I'm going to come from more of a positive psychology angle, looking at Seligman's work around the PERMA model. And the reason for that is that I truly love the profession I am in. It's not a job to me. And people talk about work-life balance. I actually don't, because part of who I am is being a leader and being an educationalist. And I absolutely am passionate about learning and wanting that shapes me. That is who I am. It's not I go to do a job. Part of who Kat is a head teacher and a learner. And there's so much doom and gloom about our profession, and people leaving and poor recruitment and stress and high levels of well-being, so low levels of well-being. And I just want to be able to look at this research and actually find out from teachers what is happening, and try and take that back to the system and policy level.
Yeah, and it sounds like the very way in which you're doing that, by speaking to teachers and hearing their stories, that's the mechanism by which that happens, right? That's an act of connection. And I think that people feel disconnected often in a sort of depersonalized system. That often there's lots of schools now that don't have staff rooms. They don't sort of encourage people to get together and to spend time together. And people just want to be seen, and people's needs are pretty sort of well understood, aren't they? People want to be seen, they want to be heard, they want to be understood. They want to have a small amount of agency over what they do. And I think that if we did that, and it sounds like the work that you're doing is doing that in spades, I think that we would have a much healthier picture with regards to recruitment and retention. So that sounds fascinating. Thank you for that. Amazing. And over to you, Ty. So we heard the big sort of chapters in your life, like South Africa, being in the army, realizing that you wanted to become a teacher. And some of those were quite significant, moments, of course. But like, is there anything else that springs to mind as you look back over that period of time? The big ideas that have really shaped you.
I think, picking up on what you've just said really as well about that relational basis and that ability and that power of connecting and connection. And that year I talked about, I took out traveling, was hugely powerful in a transitional approach to moving from being a soldier to actually engaging and getting my head around what education was all about. Because, I had a very distinct impression of what you do to teach, and would probably put in brackets instruct after it. And I think that was probably how that's my early career of teaching, was instructing. But actually, as you move yourself on foot and by sea and by land and air around the world in a very kind of primitive way, as it were, for that year, you actually understand and become to know and appreciate the value of relationships and what you can be and how you can support and challenge people and vice versa. And I think another part that, and again about relationships, another part that sort of opened my eyes was an opportunity that I had during my degree to go and study in Norway for 7 months and actually engage in a cultural and education program as part of my degree there. We're working with students from all over the world, from as far away as Oregon to a number of them from Lithuania and Italy and Germany. So it was that connectivity, I think, and that richness and diversity that I was able to encounter both through being a soldier, traveling, and those connections in Norway that I try and carry with me. And it really underpins, as I said earlier, really that opportunity that I want to lift those learners and those children and those families up and allow them to see and experience the world. Because our work, particularly recently and in recent times, it can be, and we can allow it all too easily to become too small. And with that, I think we're all very familiar with the dangers of that. And I think that's something that's always at the forefront of my mind, really. I think big moments were moving from my first teaching post to my second and seeing how leadership could be different, hugely influential for me, really. And then having those opportunities and that trust. And that was the big switch on that I was not micromanaged, and I was given an objective and I was told to come back when I'd done it, and without that detailed sort of management in between, which just, being a soldier and working in the school I worked in the first few years of my career was just mind-blowing and such an opportunity for me. Where I think one of those big significant moments that I look back on as a teacher was that myself and a colleague took 6 children from a small town from Barry Island to actually run workshops and run a lecture in Michigan State University at an international ed conference. And actually we did the warm-up for young Zhao, which was fantastic.
All right.
Not just to meet him and get and start to work with him there, but actually to have these 6 children, none of which had been overseas, none of which had been in a university environment, now found themselves in Michigan State amongst these global education thinkers, telling these global education thinkers all about what social entrepreneurship was, what it looked like. And actually, we're asking the wrong people in our community. We're asking adults about how things should change. And they presented a very strong case that we should be asking the children, and we should be listening to the children, and we should be acting on it. And to me, I think way back then, that was probably a precursor to even learn a voice, being such a large aspect of schools. And it was these 6 girls that we took who were taking the power of their community and making a change for what they wanted from their community and the society at large. So those were huge sort of drivers for me. And as Kat has alluded to, there's no getting away from family and friends then as well, isn't it? Influencing and driving that as a person. Yes, it's been, if you like, a rich tapestry of an experience. And I think what drives me and what keeps me going and what shaped that has been the continual want for children as they develop to have choices and not have that narrowed by an education system. And it narrows in options for GCSEs, it narrows in grades, it narrows in lessons you get every day in our very kind of perfunctory and utilitarian timetabling system. It narrows in every aspect of their education. And I'm living it with a year 8 child at home now, and I really try hard. And last night was a great example. What were the highlights of your day? I asked my son, and he looked at me and went, "What? I went to school." Now, how frightening is that he's been in school in a secondary system for 2 years, and that's his natural response. And I would honestly say 2.5 years ago, he would have come home and there would have been a verbose discussion around what was great from the day, what was rubbish about the day, and the world was his oyster. And it's just conformity that is chiseling off the edges. And the problem is you chisel off too many edges and you don't have any core left, and it's really frightening as a parent to see that happening. And it might be him, it might be the system, it might be the school. However, that's not right. And I want my job is to keep that away and at bay and part those seas of oppression, if you like, for as long as possible.
Completely.
I'm doing an ed doc as well.
I was wondering, what's the theme of your one?
Mine is system based, and really for me moving between that sort of macro based system and the meso, and the focus for me is about in what ways do head teachers influence translating policy to practice in schools, specifically curriculum in the case that's the case of this study. And do they influence it? How do they influence it? How does that role of national policy, national guidance, that role of law and legislation, what's the gap there, and what's the space between perception and reality of staff, and working and talking with staff right through the schools as well, where this is happening successfully and where it's not, and really trying to get under, if you like, the feeling of perception of if the school is doing well in implementing the policy, if it's not, and how does that happen? And is a head teacher enabling that? Is the staff enabling that? Is there a relationship in that? That I don't know, and that's where I am with that really. So, and for me, that's built upon again that whole interest in agency and subsidiarity, and is it reality, or is it some kind of created subjective reality that we all create, and is that a common truth across schools? There's a big discussion in that in itself, no doubt.
You're not wrong. Yeah. Oh, wow. That sounds absolutely fascinating. I want to read both of your dissertations when they're done. So let's move in to this final section of this conversation, the rethinking education bit. You'll be familiar with the format. Let's bring this back to the Welsh context. Positives, challenges, solutions, or possible solutions. So what's the thing that you talked about so much stuff to be excited about earlier, but what's the thing that you think is the most amazing thing about what's happening currently, the most positive thing about what's happening in the Welsh context? Again, we'll take these 3 questions. We'll go Kat, then Ty.
I think the most positive thing that's happening in education in Wales right now is that agency that we are afforded. It's that the framework that we've been given to use as school leaders and to design a curriculum that's right for our children within our communities. For me, at a school level, where that's working is really looking at that culture of learning we're creating, and how do we ensure that we continually focus on learning and creating that culture, and with that bring in that understanding of pedagogy and progression that we've talked about through this podcast. And I think that's really exciting, and exciting opportunities going forward.
Yeah, thank you. What about you, Ty?
I think for me, it's, and here's another confession as well, really. I kind of revel in that chaotic. And it's, for me, the interest is really, and the excitement and what's going well is how we can already see that we've gone from something that wasn't a product and was an idea to something that is actually in existence, to then having the chaotic reaction across the system in Wales, to now that being almost reduced to more of a complex system, and we're just trying to navigate the complexity of it now, not the chaos of it, and how that will evolve through practitioners and colleagues, and professional learning, and just genuine honesty and transparency from us and the system, in turning that into then order, and then turning that order into outcome. That's the exciting part for me. And I can see that as a longevity, as a series of sort of smaller timelines. And it's just really exciting to try and help and support colleagues to get them over the next kind of obstacle and get them over the next, and see this as a whole obstacle course rather than just a ditch where you're leopard crawling through water or, some monkey bars where you're swinging across it. Let's have a look at the totality of this. But most importantly, let's always and never move away from the why, ever. And we move on from the why, and we see it here every day, Kat and I. Let's not be embarrassed, and let's not think it's trite in going back to it every single day in what we do, because that's what keeps us true and what keeps us honest in what we do. And that's the exciting bit for me, really. And that's the strength of the system, is that I, as a head teacher in a country, can talk in that way about my education system and my curriculum. Let's draw up a list of how many others could do that.
Yeah, it won't take long. That's amazing. Thank you. So what do you see as the major challenges, given all of this amazing positive stuff happening? There's a lot going on, just like as you just described. What do you see as the major challenge in the next sort of 2 to 3 years, say, as people start to make their way? What do you think are the major sort of pitfalls, the ways in which this might go wrong, the ways in which we need to be quite mindful about keeping this on the track, and like you say, keeping that why at the center?
I think the first challenge that we're looking at is people holding their nerve, and I mean that on every layer within the system. So from a head teacher perspective, that head teachers still keep that confidence, that positivity around the new curriculum, and don't slip back into those old habits and those old ways, or feel like they have to go back to providing some sort of data on that individual child level, or they're accountable in that different way, and slip back into those old habits. And I think what the challenge there is from a national perspective, ensuring that professional learning is there for all aspects of education. So not just providing professional learning for teachers and teaching assistants, but also for school leaders. So we can continue. Curriculum design is not a product, as Ty has mentioned before. It's an ongoing process, and this is only the beginning of our curriculum reform. And I think the danger sometimes is it came in September 22, we're done. Well, absolutely not. We're just at the start, and it's keeping that realisation that we're just at the start. It would be really remiss of me as a head teacher in Wales to not mention the fact that we need to be adequately funded. And I'm very, very passionate about that curriculum reform cannot be done on the cheap, and it cannot be done just on the will of educators that are passionate about learning. We need to be appropriately funded for our children and our schools. And then I think the third challenge for me is that, like I mentioned earlier, that government hold their nerve as well, and that we have, and I know, James, you've mentioned this in previous podcasts, and how quickly education ministers change, and then you get a new one in and there's a new focus. We have to be in this for the long haul to actually see that this will work. Ty and I had a brilliant experience in Singapore in July of last year. We had a British Council visit, and it was just incredible to see the vision and the foresight of one nation having a single-minded attitude to education and appropriately funding it. Now, I'm not going to go into the pluses and minuses of education in Singapore, and it was not a utopia by any stretch of the imagination, but where they did have a very firm view was they were all in this together, and they didn't change at the whim of different people, and they spent time. And I think that's what we need within our system now. We need time and a government to continue to support that work.
Yeah, sure. As you know, in the implementation program, we talk about how we can anticipate, we can guarantee that there will be bumps in the road. That there's to put it mildly, and that's the nature of reality. Is that there are unexpected things, and there are complications that there are consequences to what we do, and some of them we're not even aware of. For some time. And it's quite a difficult balance to strike that, because on the one hand, there's a bit of a weather vane there, sort of tendency, isn't there, amongst politicians and among school leaders to just you start doing some policy, and the first sign that it's not working, you sort of just quickly change to something else, and then you quickly change to something else, and there's just this never-ending churn. And then the opposite sort of problem is the sunk cost fallacy, right? Which is like, if something isn't working and then just thinking, well, we're up to our necks in it now, we just need to keep digging, sort of thing, And that's a tough thing to do, but it sort of comes back to that without wanting to set you off, Ty. It comes back to that question of measuring and I won't use that word again, but like monitoring and evaluating what you're doing. And we talk about those pivot or persevere meetings, if you remember, to sort of to come together to review a whole bunch of data, bottom up stuff, looking at what's happening on the ground, what people are saying about what's happening, as well as looking at other types of data that we might collect, and continually orienting ourselves towards the optimal way of achieving that vision. And there's a mechanism there. There's a set of tools and practices, I think, that we can use to help people to hold their nerve, to help them to make it so that you don't just feel like it's blind faith, that there's a process in place, and actually that you're going to be nimble on your feet and be agile and recognize that what you think is the path currently towards fulfilling those purposes might look quite different 2 or 3 years from now from what you think it looks like now, but you'll have sort of followed your nose every step along the way, and so that's and this pilot that we're running is really exciting. I think the fact that it's no coincidence that Wales has been so open-minded and being the first country that we've worked with to fund this pilot, to embrace this idea, and let's see where that goes. But it's very exciting. So thank you for that. So astute viewers may notice that we've all changed our costumes for this final part of the conversation, especially, actually, I think I'm probably wearing the same jumper as I was last time. So let's move into the solution. So we're going to, we left last time, Kat, you were talking about the challenges that Wales faces at a number of different levels in keeping this project on track. So let's talk about some ways that we can make that happen. Let's move into solutions, and then we'll move to your challenges and fixes, Ty. So what are your thoughts, Kat, on how we can keep this on track?
Yeah, I think first and foremost for me, it's about people holding their nerve. And I mean holding their nerve at every layer of the system. So we're talking about school leaders holding their nerve, making sure that we're prioritising professional learning. So we're keeping on learning as both leaders and giving our staff the opportunity to do that. And I think as well, it's about the middle tier holding their nerve and government holding their nerve, not just looking at curriculum for Wales and thinking, oh my gosh, we've got to change it because X, Y, and Z has happened. We talked about policy development being very much at the whim of politicians often. And I think that's something that we've got to address within Wales, that if we have a new education minister, we need to have that confidence that the journey of curriculum for Wales and the intent of curriculum for Wales actually will continue in the spirit in which is intended now. And I think if we have these assurances from a policy level and from politicians, then actually it would support school leaders to actually develop and want to change and want to go into this new era. Quite often we're at the whim of whatever the current education minister is. And I think that's something that can be a real challenge for us as school leaders. It would be really remiss of me not to talk about funding. As a head teacher in Wales at the moment, we're facing huge budget cuts to our schools. And with this can often become an issue when you're thinking of professional learning and the challenges of providing that time for our staff to learn and to grow and to work collaboratively. I think that it needs to be adequately funded. Our schools are facing astronomical budget cuts that I have never, ever experienced as a school leader. And it's going to be very tough for schools over the next couple of years. But in that, there still is that moral purpose and that drive and that why that has to keep us focused. And, I will openly say that I will still prioritise professional learning within my school. I might lose staff, but I will make sure the staff that I have got are adequately trained. And I think that is really important. Ty and I were really fortunate actually back in June last year to have the opportunity of travelling to Singapore as part of a British Council visit. And what really struck us about Singapore was, number one, they didn't actually have to control budgets as head teachers. I was rather nice. It was all centrally funded and they were given a nice little pot of money to play about with and to spend. Definitely didn't have the complexities that we face in terms of budget. But also they have this single-minded vision. And that has lasted the test of time. So despite a change of education ministers, they have had this relentless focus, and that has been driven by the wider vision for Singapore and vision for education. And I think that is probably one of the greatest challenges that we face right now in Wales.
Yeah, thank you. And so you were talking about professional learning there. When we spoke last week, you talked about this idea of schools as learning organizations. And I know that that's been very central to your thinking. When I first came across this idea a while ago, I thought, what does that even mean? Like, of course, a school is a learning organization. That's like literally what a school is. But so just for the benefit of viewers or listeners, if the people haven't come across this before, can you just explain a bit about what a learning organization is and what that means in practice?
Yeah, absolutely. So the School as Learning Organisation model for Wales actually has been something that has been developed over the last couple of years. We spoke for the Welsh curriculum and particularly the work of Louise Stoll and Mark O'Cools. They spent a lot of time working with practitioners in Wales to really look at what does it mean. And for us, it has the four purposes of our curriculum at the heart of the model. It then has 7 elements to the model, and they're really focused on learning. And you said, James, schools should be focused on learning, but I can absolutely say not all are. A lot of school leaders focus on the wrong things, in my opinion, and that actually detracts from that relentless focus on learning. So what the SLO model provides are 7 key areas that we can help to focus on, things like developing a shared vision on learners and learning. And again, I would say to listeners, how often do you go back to your school vision? Is it something that just sits in a prospectus or on a website and looks lovely? Or do you actually interrogate it? Do you actually put it up as a mirror to your practices every day and use it to drive learning within your schools? It talks a lot around promoting that collaboration, promoting continuous learning for all staff, not just teachers. Teaching assistants, they're quite often that forgotten component and a huge vital part of our system. Making sure we're developing that culture of inquiry and innovation, getting that level of curiosity into our schools and particularly leading that from the top. The transversal themes that we've talked about as well that come through the SLO model, and they are time, trust, technology and thinking together. And very much they are the 4 themes that help us develop as learning organisations within our school. Again, I was in that unique opportunity of opening Jubilee Park as a new school and being able to take the SLO model and almost use it as a backbone to the strategic development of the school. And what I can say now, 5.5 years in, is we are relentlessly focused on learning and we can see the impact of that model.
Thank you. It's really, really lovely to hear that. And so it seems to be about like taking the professional learning of everybody equally importantly, right? And not just making it about like it's about the kids learning, but so that every adult is supported to learn and develop and grow their practice as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And funny enough, this week I led a professional learning network for the cluster of schools that I'm a head teacher in. And we read chapter 1 of Leading Spirals of Inquiry by Kaiser and Halbert. And it was such a refreshing read. And actually, one of the leaders in the cluster said it's the most uplifting read that they had read in for years. And what they talk about is that we talk about curiosity, we talk about learning, we talk about growth mindset, and all these things for children. But if you don't have it at that organisational level first, it's not going to work. You have to be embodying it as teachers. And actually, they put a bit in the book, and it was a quote from someone, I can't remember who, but it said, "If you aren't squirming, you aren't learning." And I love that. That's like stuck with me all week. And I keep like thinking when I walk around to my teachers, if you're not squirming, I want to know why, and I just think what a lovely thing to think about, that we all are learners, and people say they're learners, but actually are they? Are they given that time and afforded those opportunities to really sit and think and reflect about learning and their practices?
Fantastic. I saw that you posted about that on Twitter. I'll have to dig that out. I've not seen that book, so
Really good.
book. Thank you for that. I'm going to keep on to that as well. If you're not squirming, you're not learning. That whole idea of being comfortable with being uncomfortable or with discomfort.
And I think, James, for teachers, for so long, we have been the people that have been the font of all knowledge, the holder of the curriculum. We would go in, we were given something to do, we would do it. And it's very, very different now. And again, you go back to the challenges. I think that is a huge challenge for the profession, for those of us that have been in it longer than the newly qualified teachers coming in. And it's almost changing our mindset as to what is a teacher, what is a school leader, because I think the school leaders of the past and the school leaders of being very much the people that manage schools as long gone, and we have to go into this new era being learners.
Thank you. Love it. Okay, so Ty, let's look at your choices now for what you see as the major challenges and how might we overcome those challenges in the months and years ahead.
I think for us here in Wales in particular, I think really it's, and building on some of the points that Kat raised there, I think it's about trying to eliminate some of the noise in the system. And Kat alluded to perhaps in Wales, that organisation and holding the nerve in the middle tier. I think perhaps for me, it's about reducing that noise more so and actually reducing the impact of that ability, if you like, and removing that concern about holding the nerve. And, what we did see in Singapore, and a real lesson for us, is that there was a lot of direct government to school working. And the relationship was really strong between policy and practice. And for me, I think that's a real challenge in how we can harness that and how we can benefit from that. And that leads to kind of, if you like, and underpins my second big challenge is, there's a real driver of co-construction and collaboration around defining and setting out the initial steps of the journey of reform here in Wales with regards to that kind of, if you like, triumvirate of academic involvement, policy involvement, and practice involvement. And I think for us in Wales, it's about making sure that just doesn't become sort of a historical rhetoric, if you like. I think we need to take action on that. We need to not just be saying and talking about that now, we need to be doing about it. And I think that's really key. And I think that's probably the challenge in the system, is how we maintain that and maintain the value in that. And I think there's something as well, not just about pointing the finger here, because a lot of what I've just said is really a point at the system. But I think actually colleagues, leaders and practitioners need to take up a bit of the heavy lifting as well. And I think we need to go towards those academics and those policymakers and take our own steps as well and take this as an opportunity. And we had governors in school yesterday actually talking to learners about their learning and how they learn best. And it was quite enlightening that many of the learners that spoke to our governing body and as they walked around the school and had sort of direct conversation with them said that they were frightened by blank pages. And I think there's actually a lesson in that, and something that I did notice when we worked at a national level is that teachers and leaders are frightened by a blank page as well. And very often we argue and we debate and we push back and we cajole the system, explaining what we're not happy with. And then all too often that comes along with that, when we're asked what we need and we're given that opportunity to fill that void, we don't know what we want and we don't take that opportunity. So for me, it's about the profession stepping forward and having confidence in itself, and my colleagues having confidence in themselves as well. We're all head teachers. We're all teachers formally, and at the forefront of what we do is teaching and learning. But it's having confidence and understanding that we do know what we're doing, even within this new paradigm. And then the other challenge for me is systemic creep. And that appears, I think, as an accountability and an assessment creep. But also because of those two drivers, we've got what Mark Priestley refers to quite commonly, if you like, as a sort of spiral of specificity. And what we find is our system and our curriculum and our reform model that was all about trust, one of those 4 transversal themes. It was all around time as well, another one. And it was all about collaborating and thinking together. What you've got there now is that blank paper that's not being filled in by the professionals is very easily being filled in by the other tiers and large organizations within the system. And it's becoming, if you like, justification for their existence rather than that freedom and that time and that professionalism that we need as leaders, really. So those are the challenges. And amongst all of that is, if you like, that and bringing it back to that sort of Cynefin framework, that understanding and that decision-making processes and that comfortable in the uncomfortable that we've talked about and heard you talk about on other episodes, really, and understanding that we can exist in chaos, we can exist in complexity, in the complicated and in the clear. And in all of those kind of states, there's a degree of confusion. And it's about being happy with that and understanding how we work from that. And I think really it's about making sure that we've got our eyes firmly on the horizon.
Yeah. Do you know what? That's so interesting because as a practitioner myself, I used to love making kids confused. And it's sort of a funny thing because it's like people just think, well, that's ridiculous. You should be helping them to understand things. But, I remember once I was running a philosophical inquiry lesson, and this this kid, I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before as well. This kid sort of like, we had been speaking a lot earlier in the lesson, and then he sort of stopped in his tracks and he sort of paused and he realized that he contradicted what he'd said earlier. And then he said, I both agree and disagree with myself. And I just thought, that's just amazing. I was like, my work here is done. If you feel that you both agree and disagree with yourself, that's like a level of self-awareness, recognizing that that you are not one thing, and that like learning how to sit with contradictions sometimes, and to sit in that confused space and to not know what you're doing, is actually really fertile ground for human. That is what human development looks like. Like, if you think that everything's hunky-dory and you don't have any questions that you're trying to chew over, then you're probably not growing and developing. But like in our culture, like more widely, like for in a politician level, for example, like if you ask a politician a question, how often do they say, I don't know? I actually don't know about that. I'm still thinking that one through. Like, that you never hear that, because it's seen as weakness. And likewise, if Ofsted come round and or Estin or whatever, and they're asking searching questions of you as a leader, maybe the honest answer to that question is, I don't know. But we somehow think of that as weakness, that's a sign of poor leadership or something, rather than just like a sign of somebody who's immersed in the complexity of something that's really complicated and the value laden, and like you say, it's happening at the level of policy, at the level of academics, at the level of practice, and at the levels of different people throughout the organization. Really complicated what we're trying to do here.
It is, and you've hit the nail on the head there, and I referred sort of loosely to the Cynefin framework, and with that, that's a specific piece of work from Dave Snowden, and it's been around for a long time now, but it's about, and like you said with that learner that you worked with, it's about sense making, and it's about decision making, and the idea of that framework really is being comfortable in those states of where you are, and the reason why it's called Cynefin, and those listening in our system will be very familiar with that word in our curriculum, but perhaps not in this context as a framework, it's your perception, isn't it, of where you are and what lens you're looking through, and what action and decisions you need to take in order to move through that. And I think, that sort of duality you had with that sort of both agreeing and disagreeing, I think that's a state that we should all be comfortable and become more comfortable with. And I think, unfortunately, our system, and particularly here in Wales, experience and history has shown us that we actually are, and I've referred to it earlier, we have been born and brought through a very compliance-based system. And we are taught as professionals, and we are educated through our sort of ongoing professional development within schools, that there are metrics and there are tick boxes, and there are actually rewards. And there's rewards, aren't there, as individuals? We get individually rewarded and we get organizationally rewarded. There is no sort of sense of, beyond that, understanding that we have to, as a system, accept the fact that we are in this changing state and this tidal kind of ebb and flow, if you like. And I think it's important that colleagues get a chance to talk and think this through for themselves as well. And, ultimately, you've got to be happy with where you're going. And something that Kat talked about is that strength of holding your nerve, that strength of vision. Because that's actually some of the sort of ballast, isn't it, that holds you on course.
Yeah, for sure. So can I just, for the benefit of listeners and also indeed for myself, this Cynefin framework, I just looked it up. So you mentioned these 4 C's earlier: complex, complicated, chaotic, and clear. And there's a lovely, if people look it up on Wikipedia, there's a nice little diagram of it. And then there's like a sort of an axis, and in the middle, there's this blob of confusion. And I was just wondering, so like, can you explain a bit about how this works, like as a framework? Is it something that you're supposed to work through these 4 stages, or is it something that's much more like dynamic and back and forth? What's the idea of it?
I think it can both, if you look at it as a linear process from that clear or towards that clear, I think it works like that. But I think that's quite a naive process to look at it. And I think you can exist both in one state and multiple states at the same time. And I think that's, the fundamental linear, or even you raising that, do you proceed through it in that way, is probably part of the naivety of our system as well. And that kind of quick fix of looking to, is there a state that I can find myself in, and is there an immediate solution? So I think I'd like to take the line that student did with you and say yes and no. And I think you can actually use it as a linear process to work towards that clarity from chaos. But equally so, I think you need to be grounded in the fact that you could be in multiple parts of that theory at the same time. And yet you could quite rightly be in a situation in school, and particularly school, because there are so many layered, strata in school and elements that we take part in. And we lead, whether that's socially, whether that's community-based, whether that's developing pedagogy or developing culture, or even staff and family relationships. And I could quite openly say, as an organization, as an overview, that actually we're actually quite in a complex stage at the moment. But unpicking that, each of those elements could quite rightly be in an individual state within themselves as well. And what it does do for me, it provides, and what that theory and that framework does, it provides a sense of questioning and a sense of action and a sense of reflective kind of foci that you should be thinking about in order to kind of maneuver yourself both out of it, but also not kind of fearing it, if that's the better phrase that you use there as well. So, and I think coming into a new school for myself, and perhaps, Kat taking on and building that organization from scratch as well, I think you could quite rightly be fixed in one of those stages, but equally so across all of them.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to look further into this, because I can see what you mean. And some people might think, oh, clear, that sounds like the nicest place to be in when everybody's clear. But some of the other words in this quadrant on this diagram here are like tightly constrained, no degrees of freedom, and this idea of best practice, that there is a best way of educating human beings, and that if you're not doing that, then you're somehow like a naughty teacher or something. And it's this idea that there's these linear relationships, that you've got like cause and effect, and that if you do this input, then you get this output. And recognizing, it seems like that in the complex quadrant, the language up there is things like enabling constraints, things that being emergent rather than best practice, and it's things that are just like reflecting the dynamic, ever-changing nature of what it is that we're dealing with here, social reality,
And that social reality, isn't it? If you looked at the framework at first glance, you really do want to consider yourself as a leader or as, as a community in moving, sort of clockwise from that chaotic kind of complacency and that confusion there through the system. But as you can see, and you quite rightly pointed out, that blob in the middle, it touches all of them, and it actually doesn't just touch all of them. It actually, if you look at it, it looks like it acts as for me as well, as a conduit between all of them as well. So whilst, yes, we talk about that movement around that clockwise action and ending in the clear, for me, I quite easily could find myself in more than one of those quadrants at any one time, at via that confusion state.
Yeah. So to summarize, like in terms of, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but would you say that you want to embrace the complexity of what's happening here, and to not sort of hurry too quickly towards a state of like feeling like, okay, we need to be clear about what the curriculum for Wales looks like in theory and in practice and at all of those levels? Are you sort of saying like, let's just embrace the complexity?
I am, and you're not putting words in my mouth there. It is about understanding, appreciating, and more importantly, James, it's about valuing the complexity we've been given. And I talked very much when I worked at the policy level about this heavy lifting, and this is what I mean. And I think for me, this framework defines that heavy lifting, and it's a responsibility that we have to have as professionals, as educators. And, the irony sometimes for me is that in the classroom, we ask children to move through that framework and live in each of those quadrants all of the time, on a daily, hourly, minute-by-minute basis. And yet, isn't it something that, colleagues and professionals either shy away from or actually, want that quick fix for? And that excites me and frightens me at the same time. So, we're back to that duality again, and frightens me because surely as educators, more importantly, we should be thinkers and we should be doers, yes. But excites me because there's an opportunity here, isn't it, to support and work with and collaborate with colleagues to help them as well. So that, for me, that's fantastic. And yes, you're right. I think we need time. And I think, Kat and I talk quite a lot about slowness when we work with groups and we support colleagues and we make presentations. And it's about reveling, isn't it? It's about immersing. It's about appreciating. And it's about understanding that, any solution that we think that we got shouldn't be a solution, because it's when that solution is that sort of painting the fourth bridge, if you like, again. It's when you should actually be going back and actually starting getting that red oxide back on it all again and unpicking it. And so many colleagues at CAT will tell you, and I come across, want to pin it to the wall and say, that's our curriculum, that's our thinking, that's what we're about as this school. But yeah, that's great. And that might work for 12, 18, 24 months, and it might work very well. But what happens when society around you changes slightly? What happens when the metrics of our own system and education change slightly? And more importantly, what happens when that child in front of you and their needs change slightly? How can you pull that off the wall day after day and deliver it in the same way to very different people with very different needs? And dare I say, a very different horizon.
I think exactly that, Ty, and we talk a lot about that notion of process versus product as well. And I think that ties in beautifully here, that when you're, a lot of the work that we do with school leaders around Curriculum for Wales has been that they want a shiny product. They want to see, this is what it looks like in my school, this is the end goal. And you can't, you have to embrace that chaos and complexity of, don't know what it's going to look like, and actually it will look different every single year because we have different children, we have different groups of children, we have world events happening that we have to react to. And I think if anything over the last few years, what has taught us on a society level is that things do change and things are very different, and we need to be ensuring our children and our workforce are able to do that as well and react to that change.
And it's a good read, Kat, actually, that we are picking up and we are all reading in my cluster. There's a great book by David Perkins called Future Wise, and it starts off, doesn't it, about, everybody's got an opinion on education. Everybody wants, or, there's a drive, particularly his kind of pushback thinks there should be this, core canon, and that we all should be doing the same thing, whether it's internationally, globally or whatever. But actually what that doesn't address is that change in need, and it doesn't instill confidence in practitioners, because what you're doing, for me, and we've talked about this, it's removing that agency, and it's actually eroding and undermining that agency, and it's about who agrees and who can actually say and agree, whether that's nationally or globally, what's worth teaching. Who gets to make that call? Who decides that, and why? And going back to that why that we've talked about through this, what for what purpose? And I think we don't spend enough time on the purpose. And I think, we mentioned on social media in the last few days as well, haven't we, that, what's the purpose of education? What's the purpose of schooling? What's the purpose of curriculum? I don't think we attribute enough time in the beginning to that. And I really think, talking about process here, Kat, we don't attribute enough time to going back and unpicking that. And I would add that third P to that, Kat, that I always have to remind you about is, it is process before product, but it's people before process.
Absolutely.
Love it. Well, thank you both massively. I am so excited about what is happening in Wales at the moment. It is just phenomenal. And thank you for filling me in on my ignorance of that. This is something that should be known about more widely. And I know that other countries have been on similar journeys. They've been trying to do something sort of similar in Scotland and in Northern Ireland, as I understand it, and in the Republic of Ireland. And elsewhere around the world. And so this is not a completely solo effort. Like you say, you've been engaging with schools internationally to try to make the best job of this. And it's just super excited to see how this is going to play out, to be able to play a small role in it, to help to make this really fly. Let's watch this space. So as a final word then, do you have anything that you would like to leave our listeners with? Anything that you would like to point them in the direction with? A recommendation of something that they might want to read or check out?
I would say for school leaders, it's about being agile. And I think, James, you mentioned that word previously. We have to be prepared to change. We have to be prepared to lead in a new era. And I think that is something we have to do, and we have to collectively hold our nerve with that as well. And and as Ty has said, we need to collaborate, we need to talk to each other, we need to spend time having these big questions and having open debates. There's no right or wrong answers, and I think we have to really move into that sphere of building those collaborative networks as school leaders, so we can have these open conversations. And going back, as Ty just said then, about people, it's about building those relationships. And if anybody wants to look at anything, I would say have a look at the School as a Learning Organisation model and hold that up as a mirror against your school, and really see whether you are a school focused on learning.
Yeah, thank you. I'll post it. So the Louise Stoll you mentioned earlier, she wrote a thing with the OECD, wasn't it? About is that like the seminal text on learning organisation?
Yeah, it is. And there's also a really, really useful booklet that actually goes through, was widely available, via Google and things like that, that actually goes through each element of the SLO model and articulates what it actually looks like, with little cameos of where that's happening in practice across the world, and particularly across sort of like the OECD countries that they work with. And I found that very, very handy at the beginning of the journey of working through that model. So I would recommend having a little Google for that as well.
Thank you. Okay, Ty, what would be your parting recommendations?
I think, it's kind of trying to be sage, I suppose, but failing miserably in. I think we all need, as professionals, to be open. I think we need to have a degree of honesty of where we are and what we understand with each other, without fear of punitive judgment or scorn. I think I'd like to think of us and push us more towards less of a kind of false dichotomy sort of driver, and more kindness towards each other and understanding, and making sure that we are very future focused. I think that for me is all about the core principle, really, that for me will underpin getting towards a profession that has, and we've talked about it, and my ambition, a genuine understanding and a genuine action around agency. And I think on that note, I would probably recommend a book by Mark Priestley called Teacher Agency. And you can't miss it when it's on any bookshelf. It's got an absolute kaleidoscopic cover on it. And it's got contributions and on work and research in there as well by Gertby Esther, who for me is another sort of forward thinker and leading light on that. And then the final author, Sarah Robinson, as well. And I think there's a lot in that, and there's a lot of work for me and reading and interest and excitement that spins off that. So that's where I would go. And I think if you want to create a culture in your school that is what I've said, open, honest, kind, and forward-looking, you really need to unpick what agency is on all its multiple levels. And I even got, Kat and I got recommended last night further reading and research to get into around that as well. So hopefully that will be, if you like, the room which people go into that has a myriad of doors for them to then go and explore for themselves.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've been having these conversations with this group of people, this Education Policy Alliance, and we were talking last night. We were talking about the need to diversify the system, to diversify like different types of school organizations, and then diversifying what's happening within schools as well. And then we sort of thought, somebody pointed out towards the end of the conversation, they're like, we're not really talking about diversification here. We're talking about unleashing agency and freedom. And so we were talking about subsidiarity a lot as well, the need for this to devolve decision-making down to the level and to trust teachers and leaders to make good decisions, rather than sort of micromanaging them from the top.
Yeah, and agency in itself brings me all the way back to the Cynefin framework, because agency is chaotic, it's complex, and it's actually about mapping that kind of understanding of where you are, what action you need to take next, which again then links back to the Schools as Learning Organisation model and some of the really nice thinking around, particularly even that learning compass work, Kat, that the OECD have done as well, and I think there's a wealth of really good stuff, even if you just lived for the rest of your life around that kind of, that signposted, that documentation and that thinking. So I think there's a PhD in itself there, James.
Or another podcast, James.
Or another podcast, or both. Quite a few people have said that the podcast is like doing a master's or something, that they'd be like, maybe we're not accrediting this. Well,
good luck with that.
Yeah. Thank you both hugely for taking the time to speak with me. It's been an absolute delight. I'm really looking forward to seeing what people make of this, and seeing how this whole thing plays out.
Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr iawn, and hwyl fawr.
Yeah, diolch yn fawr, James. It's been an absolute pleasure to share our journey.